Welcome to the Meru Media Podcast with Mukunda Ravi.
Hey everyone, how are you all doing? Welcome to the Meru Media Podcast. And we have a great show today. We're going to have one of my favorite podcasters that I've been following for quite a while now on the show. He's going to join us in less than a minute. We've done a couple live streams in the past week, or actually we've done two big ones. One, we went into West Huff, and then other one we went into mythology and Mahabharata. And today we're going to do myth, Christianity, and MythVision with my boy and yours, Derek Lambert. Derek, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Hey, so sorry for the delay. Is it Mukunda? Is that the proper way to pronounce it? Mukunda.
Well, I mean, the proper way in Indian languages would be Mukunda, but Mukunda. In America, I even go by Mukunda, right? So it just makes it easier for
it's getting that pronunciation just right is the difficulty.
That's right.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. I saw from your interview with Neil, or at least joining him on the stream, you're very insightful on some really cool stuff, and I love this stuff. I love kind of went a little full circle, going from fundamentalist to chip on my shoulder, but also loved the mythology, and then now I'm back to I actually love this. I love learning this stuff, and it's an interesting process.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, this is where I feel like the podcast with you today is going to cover kind of like your background, your history, how you got to where you got to. And then, because I think it's just not, individuals that go through this, groups of people go through this, and many groups of people go through this kind of engagement with knowledge, traditions, and then reason and rationality, and then trying to find that good mix between, that. So, for our audience, first things first, before, we get into this, check out the YouTube channel, MythVision, on YouTube. It's fantastic. He's got, almost 300,000 subscribers. His videos are insightful, amazing. He does both long form conversations and documentary style videos where Derek, really dives in deep on Christianity and like Judaism, but also brings in the elements of Hellenic traditions, culture, the Romans, Near Eastern, other traditions around there, and shows how they kind of like it doesn't drop out of the sky,
right?
So to speak, right? So, and that's, I think, is one of the biggest takeaways when you actually engage in these conversations or even read books, is things are all causally connected.
That's the biggest thing. I mean, you're really hitting the home, I think, that is so important, because in the West, especially in America, not only do we kind of have a superiority complex, right, where we just think we are the greatest nation on the earth, we have a pride about us, but religiously, you're kind of taught that you're chosen, you're a special elect, chosen. Different Christians have different, theological perspectives, but what we're not taught, they are taught that the way to unite humanity is through their ideology. Right. That you need Jesus, right, in order to get all humanity under the one umbrella. Where I'm at in my education now and I think as humans, if every human could be educated, I know this is a tall task to get, but like maybe when we make universally this knowledge known and understood, it breaks down the us versus them ideologies. You may practice a tradition.
I lose you for a sec. Hold on. I think I lost you for a sec. My
Am I
audio
here?
Is it coming? Hold on. It's probably on my end.
Let me make sure.
Let me test this
How am I
again.
doing now? Am I doing good?
Yeah, it looks like
Better?
going somewhere else. Give me 1 sec. Everyone.
Okay.
Minor issue here. Hold on. Sorry, Derek.
Hey, no worries.
That's why it popped up. It's disconnected. There we go. Should be back. Let's see here.
Am
Sorry.
I?
I'm new to this StreamYard stuff, so
I get it.
a little difficulties here and there. It's okay. Sorry, guys. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. This is my fault. It's on me. There we
You're
go.
fine.
There we go. All right, guys. So sorry about that, Derek. Lost you there for a sec.
No, you're good.
all right.
You're good.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you.
You're
Go
good.
ahead.
Turn this light back on so I'm not in the dark here. Just so you could see my face better. Okay. Long story short, brother, is that I feel once you see how connected the stories are,
Right.
once you see how they're dependent on a much more ancient tradition that's passed down, you know, the tribalism is not as strong. Every human's going
Right.
to always have it. But what if we found out that every religion is inherently dependent and should nod a respect to some other form of tradition that passed along ideas and concepts, because it's really the broader universal human experience being expressed in particular cultural locations, geographic locations. You know, clearly there's some models that we would look at and go, okay, we shouldn't do that anymore. You know,
Right.
Human sacrifice was a common thing back in, you know what I mean? Like the
Right.
pros and the cons, but it once you see how the narratives of these stories, whether they're myths, whether they're just wisdoms philosophically, they're connected. Am I still breaking
Right.
up?
No, you're good. I'm just moving back and forth between
You're
different
fine.
screens. Yeah. So because I I'm trying to also get the people on the channel to know the thing is up. No, so it is. So those connections are so important. Not only because I think, look, if you want to believe, you want to believe. If you want to engage in, and I'm a believer like myself, like I believe in my tradition. But it's also understanding what the tradition thought of itself historically, and then what the tradition thought of itself now in regards to engagement with Islam and Christianity, which has shifted the nature of the conversation, right? Like, I'll give you an example. For most of Hindu or Buddhist history, no one cared about trying to show that these stories were real. It was just accepted as if, like, okay, the mythology is there, it's present, it's a way to think about the world. And yes, people thought it was real, but the historicity didn't matter. But now, when we come and talk, like, people are trying to prove the history of these things, and I'm like, well, does it really matter? Does that really matter, the history? Because our tradition itself gives us the way internally. It gives you the hermeneutics to think about the text, not historically, but more spiritually, metaphorically,
Right.
psychologically, right? So, I think that's one of the some things I miss in the Christian Islamic world. It starts with the really, let's hit hard with the historicity of Jesus and everything that happened, or historicity of Muhammad and everything happened, as opposed to saying maybe there's some other truth that they were trying to tell in these stories.
I agree. I think it's tough. It's tough
Yeah.
to really nail down what did the author intend? And at some point, they may have inherited something that was meant to be understood or was taken to be believed in some literal sense. But like at the same time, I don't know that that's always the case, or even I would say often doesn't seem to be the case. The author would have been in the know. They would have understood at least what they're doing is a variation, isn't actually what happened. It's what they must have been sophisticated on a higher level, in my opinion, than just assuming that the scribe who wrote this down is just regurgitating what everyone literally must have believed, because it's so propagandistic often in opposing other models. And so like this is the tug of war. The more you learn and realize how connected all these narratives likely are and have stemmed origins and somewhere through trade route or something, or even just basic universal psychology that humans have formulated observations and myths and stories about the human experience, you run into a issue where I think when a philosophy forces you to poo-poo everyone else, like we see with the Christian model, that becomes, I feel like, while it might unify your constituency under one umbrella, it's more of a toxic ideology to me versus the plurality and the inclusiveness of various forms of expression that you get within polytheistic form. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is interesting. I mean, I think this is where, I think your experience would really help, right? Because from, I want you to get into it, but in some sense, you start off Christian, right? And you start off in, would you say, relatively like religious family, or kind of, let's walk through your background, because I think this topic, they connect,
By the way, am I coming through clear? Everything's good?
Yeah.
Okay,
You're great.
Cool.
You're fantastic.
Again, sorry for being a little late. My dad was born into a Catholic family. He was the kind of Catholic who partied, wasn't very religious. He believed, but social Christian Catholic, mass on Sunday. When he got with my mom, mom was Pentecostal growing up, very speaking in tongues, very charismatic. And she was much more oneness, holiness, theologically and stuff. So they were completely different worlds of Christianity. And dad only went to church when there was like a wedding. He didn't really go to church, right? But he always believed something. I think he still does today, but he's also like a skeptical believer kind of thing. He's willing to hear me out when I do argue against things. But then he's like, yeah, you know what? God bless you. I love you. I'll pray for you. And it's like, oh, okay. That's how dad is. That's my upbringing, right? But mom was much more devout. So mom, when she'd go through religious phases when I was a young boy, and she'd go to this Baptist church down the road, the closest thing that, she could tap into and probably theologically agree, or at least somewhat get along with. And she would say, I'll take you to Golden Corral, which is a buffet, all you can eat food. If you come to church with me, I'll take you to all you can eat. You bet your ass I'm going to go eat at buffet, because I love eating. And we would sit and I'd listen to this dry, boring, absolutely cringe message as a little kid who did not care about what the pastor, all these adults are talking about, a message I didn't care about. I wanted to go outside and kick the soccer ball with the rest of the church kids. And then occasionally I'd hear this story about a man with animals on a boat, and those were the things I remember. It was like, oh, there's a boat and there was a flood and there was animals. Oh, but I didn't take Christianity or religion too seriously. Even though we would pray at night, we always did we would do like various types of form of prayers. But at night, mom would pray with us sometimes. It was when I became a teenager and the trauma, I think, from my dad being an alcoholic, that I went to a private Christian school, because some of the public schools had a lot of violence and stuff mom didn't want me to get sucked into and mistreated. And I then really started to be more aware in this world, if you will, and heard a message. The message was about lying. It started off about lying. And if you lie, you have to lie about your lie. So now you're having to cover up a lie using a lie, and then you have to lie. And it's like the pastor was using some analogy, and they guilt tripped me, bro. I was so guilty. And then he goes, but while there are these sins in your piggy bank, so to speak, that are there, they make you believe that you did wrongdoings. It's there, but it has to be removed. So they're already giving you the disease, and then they're diagnosing you, and then they're ready to give you the cure. There's a Father in heaven. He's got you, and he loves you unconditionally. Well, that message resonated with me because my father was my hero and he was an alcoholic and he was like a werewolf at night and he was the best in the day. And he would
Yeah.
be abusive when he was drinking verbally. And the words were not love. They were not love. They were hate. Whatever you name under the sun. You know what I mean? It was everything under the sun. So when I heard there was a father in heaven who was perfect, and then the emotional stuff and the music and the environment and everyone around you is applauding you for walking down to receive this message and stuff, that was when I felt a warmth in my stomach, an experience that was profound. And I can remember it to this day. Very euphoric, placebo. Well, it was super powerful. And but just because I know, like, I think there's reason to explain the science behind it, I don't want that to take away the significance of the pragmatic or the applicability of the experience and
Sure.
how it can profoundly change your psychology to help you to do better in life. And I believed that that experience was true. And so all of my beliefs kept coming back to an experience. And so I couldn't question my beliefs. I could question about a belief, but meaning like it was true that God was real, Jesus was the Son of God, and that this was the real religion. It was just
Right.
like, is Calvinism, is Arminianism, is free will, is it predestination, is it this? Because of that experience, I couldn't release the ultimate foundation of what happened on those days when I would go and have altar calls, if that makes. And I had many, by the way, many in my
Right.
life. I've been saved several times. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's, it's fascinating because I went to Catholic school, right? And Catholic tradition is a little different than, the more Baptist, Pentecostal tradition in that sense. But I want to take you back a second because I think this is where some of the, people's religion gets a really strong hold. And I'm not even talking about Christianity, just religion in general. Gets you
Right.
really strong hold in a moment when you're looking, when you're lost, when, like, people rarely find religion when they're super happy, right? It's not like
Right.
you're on the high, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna go find God, right? It's like, it's when you're low, when you're hit, when you're struggling, that you look for something. I think people are looking for the certainty of
Yeah.
like something happening, right? Like when you're, whether it's like your trauma or other people's maybe abuse and other people's fears, you go look for something to grasp onto, to hold on to give you like our life raft when you're drowning in some sense. And I'm not saying that in and of itself is bad, but I do sometimes think is because you do that in the period of uncertainty and you find something that feels certain, you become so latched onto that certainty
Exactly.
that like you throw out your reasoning, your logic, your even sometimes your humanity goes out the window, right? Like you're like when Christians or anyone says, I hate the sin, love the sinner, hate the sin kind of stuff. You're like, but in your tradition, if you sin, you're a sinner. So it like
Right.
you can't break that, right? Like the sin and sinner is almost inextricably connected. But in your when you came to the church and you started, desiring for that, what was it you're looking for that really Christianity resonated with you? Did you were you at that time exposed to other traditions, or was it Christianity? What was the pull of any particular form of Christianity that you chose at that time?
Yeah, I think the initial type of Christianity that drew me was that I was loved. It was
Yeah.
the concept of love, right? And my father being a special forces military Green Beret, would always go overseas, and I wondered if this was the last time I would see him.
Right.
So he was in the 7th group, so he'd go to South America, Spanish-speaking regions of the world to try and, they'd go on missions to try and either combat with cartel or potentially help particular regions that were poor and, help them out.
Right.
There was all sorts of stuff, I'm sure. In my mind, I think what gravitated me was this idea of self-sacrifice because I was already kind of raised with this mindset in a military household that the noble, honorable person would be to go and fight to protect, there was a special forces prayer we used to say growing up: help the helpless, help the helpless, help the weak, defend the defenseless, from the bullies and the tyrants and things like that, and we're trying to help
Right.
them, right? So like when you hear the message of a man laying down his life for his friends, in that, it just easily rolls over to Jesus laying down his life
Right.
in a sense. The other thing is I think what I really liked when I originally started doing the whole Christian thing was the music and the emotion that you get to tap into through the experience, singing these songs and feeling this emotion of love and humble surrender and peace and things like that. That is what I really liked about it. And it may be
Right.
because of my trauma, because of the particular am I really loved experience from my past. In fact, I had a brain scholar, a guy who's like an expert on the brain and consciousness, Mark Solms, who wrote a book called The Hidden Spring. Very bright guy. I explained a little bit of my past, right? Just briefly. And he was like, oh, yeah. So in your brain stem, your reptilian brain, he's going into all this stuff. And he said, you, Derek, who got hooked on opiates later, I got addicted to oxys and all that. The reason you went to that is it gave you that same love feeling, that warm euphoria that you get, that comfort feeling, likely due to the traumas of while you were growing up, whether or not you were truly loved. And a lot of people who like uppers, speed and things like that, they often don't have that same experience, the identical not feeling the love. They have a different kind of trauma. But he was saying that Jesus, that dopamine hit that you get in your opiate receptors, played a role in all of this. So I wonder if that's what gravitated me to this form of Christianity. Eventually later, I got into more like really Protestant. And when I say Protestant, like historical Protestant Reformation type of Christianity, Calvinistic, PCA. We were like an off branch of the Puritans. We were like legit, like reading 1700 hymns, like very old school. Women wore head coverings. It was very different from the kind I got drawn into originally.
So can you tell us what the kind you got drawn into? What was that kind? And how is it like differ from the Calvinist and Protestant version?
One is more, I think what happens over time, you go in and it's experience based. The one that I got into, non-denominational, much more like spiritual type of Christianity. There are demons, there are angels, there are spirits, and you have power when you pray or speak in tongues. Like you have power in a sense to alter reality if you're actually tuned into the spirit and you play a powerful role, but it's very free will. Free will played a significant role in that. So that was my initial, like, we didn't talk about free will. We just believed we all had the inherent capability. You just need to believe, right, in Jesus, and you won't go to hell. And there's so many weeds. There's so many rabbit trails. I mean, even the doctrine of Jesus dying and going to hell for 3 days. Like, in this tradition of this non-denominational church, they believe that Jesus died and suffered in hell for 3 days. So it wasn't like he died, just went in the tomb and he was dead. He was down there burning and suffering for 3 days and then came back. Like, but later on, the Protestant churches that I started to gravitate towards, like Calvary Chapel, more Baptist churches. I went to a Christian college, and then I eventually ended up in a PCA Presbyterian Protestant church, and they were very reformed. The difference is, honestly, they were very dry. They were very historical, theologically precise, trying to really understand what the Bible teaches as historical and evidence-based as you can, is what they were trying to do. And by doing that, you learn a lot of tools that work against that very tradition itself. This is why, from Calvin and Luther, the Protestants, when you move forward and you get to the rationalist and other scholars, if you will, that were in the Protestant tradition, they start to be so critical because of the science that builds up on criticizing their own textual tradition of the Bible, that some of them start going, Paul didn't write any of these letters. It was Christians. They can't blame atheists. They can't blame agnostics. They can't blame skeptics. These were Christians who said, Nah, Paul didn't write any of this, but they still loved it. Nope,
Right.
Jesus didn't say any of these words. This was an author later. It was thanks to these people who used the science that debunked their own kind of models that they had, and then we inherit it today through scholarship.
Yeah, it is, that part's interesting because like you've had guests on Gnostic Informant, I mean Neil and Jacob from History Valley that have discussed the Pauline letters, that and engagement with the historicity, not historicity, and I think that's part of my guess is your exposure to these various types of Christianities and ways they approach the text so differently has like sparked that interest in like being open to all these different scholarly opinions. I mean, just a thought, but
yeah, it is, especially when you hear experts that you build relationships with these people too.
Yeah.
And it's hard to think they're fools, like they don't have contribution, right? And so you're hearing all of these different takes, and there's a consensus trend on certain issues, but there's some stuff that doesn't carry a consensus. Some stuff doesn't. It just doesn't. And I don't know if it's the contrarian in me or if there's like a sense in which I just don't have a dog in the fight so strong that I mock or scoff a contrarian view that may radically alter the consensus standing on something. For example, Paul's 7 letters that they claim are really from Paul and Paul wrote is a consensus issue amongst critical scholarship. Yeah. Conservative Christians go beyond that and say, no, there's more letters. Like Ephesians is also part of it. Colossians is all like they add in all these letters, right? But if you do go back to like Bruno Bauer or you go to the radicals, the Dutch radicals, some of these people actually believe that Paul only wrote 4 of the main letters, right? Well, why is it that you get looked at sideways when you question those 7? So there are trends that are consensus, and I don't know what the answer is. That's the thing. I literally, who am I, right? But I do listen to the other scholars to understand why they think that way, and I leave the door open for whatever the conclusion could be, because I don't think either side knows. I think they're educated guesses, respectful people who are doing the best they know how to make sense of things. And I think that more power to them, which is why I want to have the people come on and go, no, these 7 are really Paul. But sometimes you gotta give more airtime to the new idea, which people get pissed off about. Why don't you have the other person come on? It's like, bro, I've been talking to the other people for 3 years now. Can we let the new idea have a chance? I mean, let's breathe a little. Let them get a little bit in the air. Then bring your criticisms. But I also feel the pressures amongst my scholarly friends, and my scholarly friends who don't like those new ideas because either they were trained to believe it or they decide that they only want to go with consensus in a field that they're not experts in. Respect, I get it. They look at me like, well, it takes decades for consensus to come around and realize like, and I get that, that's true. But MythVision isn't waiting. MythVision isn't saying, okay. Once everybody agrees, I'll talk to this scholar. No. I even talk to non-academics about ideas they have. Like, it's a show. I'm not a peer-reviewed, you got to come here and this is all perfect. And that's been a complaint. If you look up MythVision on Reddit, they'll go, man, he has some great stuff. And then they'll go, oh, and he also has some sewage. Well, that's their perspective, that it's sewage. And what do they mean by sewage? They'll think Richard Carrier or Robert Price, mythicist models and stuff is sewage. I don't think it's sewage. I'm not persuaded of the mythicist model right now, but I do not count it out. I do not think that it's ridiculous, so
yeah.
Anyway.
And I think that's a good point, because I think there's some areas where I think, frankly, like all evidence and all knowledge-based claims are, it's about probabilities, right? And you're really skewing towards one or the other based on, each individual is what I mean is. And then also when you look at people like Carrier or Price compared to Ehrman or, Litwa or any of these other scholars that, argue that Jesus existed. And I tend to be in that camp.
I don't mean to interrupt, but Litwa Litwa is hard to pin down on this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is hyper. Like, I don't want to say hyper because it sounds over, but he is in a very, very critical camp. And I don't want to strum him and say that I know he absolutely is convinced like Bart. Bart is staunch historicist, whereas Litwa is more like, maybe he thinks there's a guy, maybe. Like, he may not even know if Paul existed. Like, he may be close to Nina. I don't know for sure how to pin Litwa down. Sorry, I just...
No, and that's a fair point. I appreciate that, because I mean, there's other scholars, Goodacre and a bunch of other people that might argue that Jesus existed. I mean, there's a whole host of scholars, John McCrossan, all these guys, right? Like, exactly. So, but I think the argument that Jesus might not have existed is a plausible and maybe lower probability argument, but it's not out of the scope of conversation. So I think part of the problem is, look, if you had on, like, I don't know, Ben Carson, who said Jesus was an alien, maybe that would be like another, like, a little too out of kilter. But, I think for the most part, when I've seen your shows and almost, probably most, if not all your episodes, your guests are pretty solid. Your questions are solid. You come to the table with good knowledge, and you push back. And that's an important thing. It's, like, a lot of times nowadays there's this big, when you look at Rogan or you have, Flagrant and all these people, they let on people, they just spew nonsense. Right. And then whether it was, like, for example, like anti-vaxxer stuff or, like anti-science stuff. And you're just like, okay, maybe there's a time period when you hit a certain threshold of people that follow you, that you have more responsibilities to be a bit more judicious in terms of who you bring on and how you engage. But I think for the most part, like, when you're doing this kind of stuff, it's less concerning to me because there's so much on the other side. Like, it just you're given that countervailing position where it's really like you're dealing with the Christians that are like, the Bible's absolutely 100% true, and every word is true. Therefore, all scholarship is nonsense. Or inspiring philosophy that is all over the map, where he picks and chooses what makes sense to him, which is fine. But, like, just say that.
Me and him have had our run-ins, right, in the past. Truth is, though, like, I think over time, unless there's social political means in his life that draw him to have to take a stance the way he does, I think that he's going to educate himself out of being such a apologist type. I think eventually, if he's honest, he'll come to a place where he's much more flexible and liberal with his tradition than he already is right now. But he's even more liberal than the rest of usually a lot of Christian apologists.
That's true.
So fingers are crossed for him in the future, I think. And not to say he needs to exit his tradition. It's just when someone's making bona fide historical arguments, and that it's almost like a lot of the apologetic arguments that I hear are, it's obvious. And if you don't see it, you're an idiot. That's how so I combat that with, like, it's not obvious. In fact, it seems obvious that the other position makes more sense. And that is the opposite view, that this is a human thing and not divine. And therefore, there are many other dying and rising deities. There are many other, and I have to bring all that stuff in to kind of point out, it's not obvious. Because if it's obvious, then Mithras and Dionysus and Asclepius and the list can go on and on. But I like also what you said there, because, like, for me, again, if you think about it from a believer's perspective, a more of a fundamentalist believer perspective, you can't have this flexibility in conversation. You can't allow a Jesus may not have existed guy, or you can't have someone pushing a new, very controversial view, because it comes from a sensitive dogma tradition. And a lot of scholarship still carries that baggage, I think. A lot of scholarship, critical scholars, carry sometimes this baggage where that's too far, that's too much. But if we were in classics talking about Heracles, maybe there's someone who believes it that's in a classical realm that's come to believe in Heracles, more of a metaphor probably, but I can't imagine they believe anything historical. So if you start arguing, this Heracles account is more factually rooted in history than this other Heracles or whatever or something.
Right.
No one's losing their shit. No one is, like, losing their mind going, oh my God, Heracles, Asclepius, really? Are you kidding me? You can potentially go to hell for that. Like, it doesn't have that stigma, whereas Bible scholars have to tiptoe because the constituencies and the schools and the pastors, a lot of times, not always, it does at least subconsciously, I think, play a role in the field. And it's let's be careful, because this is a living religion. Imagine if I went over into India and I went to their colleges and I started learning about Hinduism in a secular critical fashion. And
Right.
there are many conservative Hindus, but I start questioning Krishna. I start to do something, you better not, okay? And there might be, you would know better than me. I imagine there is stigma there. There is something where you have to be cautious who or where you are speaking about these things.
Well, so on the India side, this is where it's interesting. All of Indology, for the most part, like 99.9% of Indology, takes that position you just took, which is all this is they're stories, their imagination. Krishna, Rama, these gods are fictive in the sense of their narrative structure, their narrative like traditions.
Right.
We have no sense of Krishna existed. We don't think they existed. Is what the most in like scholars of Hinduism would say.
Scholars,
right?
Okay.
Even practicing scholars will argue from that perspective, right?
Got it.
But and even if you go to India on the whole, you'll find that conversation where it's not so much people are like, well, Krishna existed. It's more like, well, people believed in Krishna, so we take this religious site, like even like this big issue about that's been going on for 20, 30 years around the birthplace of Rama, right? It's called the Rama Janmabhoomi, where in 1992, I think there was a bunch of Hindus like tore down this mosque called Babri Masjid because they said there's a temple there before that worshipped Rama, and they believed it was the birthplace of Rama. Mm-hmm. Now, the question was not whether it actually was the birthplace of Rama. The argument by most Hindus was, we believe this to be the birthplace of Rama. And we believe this is like, so the argument wasn't the historicity, it was the belief in the sanctity of that place.
Got it.
So
got it.
In India, large more part, like if you say Krishna didn't exist, no one's gonna be like, oh yeah, you're full of crap. They're just like, okay, so what? Like, and part of this comes from the fact, like if you go back to, like you said, Hercules or Aphrodite or Dionysus, when the Greeks interacted with other people and they saw a similar deity, Hercules, they will say that's Hercules, that's Dionysus. Like they would see the universality of their gods everywhere. And I think the Hindus do the same thing. The difference is, I think, is when Christians and Muslims do it, their God is so special and so different from everyone else. No other God can be like that. So there is that requirement on their end that there is something unique and utterly historical nature of their deity or their prophet that I don't think other traditions had historically. Like if you said, like, yeah, I don't believe in Krishna as a human being, fine. Krishna has an energy. Good. Go to town. Right. So I think it's a little different that way. It's just
I just figure I'd kind of try to make an analogy to
but the analogy is fair. It's a fair.
Okay, there's probably some practitioners, I imagine, right? That might but it's a very, very serious popular thing in America. We and that's why people are like, oh, you're Christ phobic. They'll use terms like that for me because I'm critical of Christianity. And no, my whole family is Christian. I love all of them, and I have there is no social any stigma between conversating and how close I am with them. I'm just trying to educate. I really am, and I think it could do us a good dose of helping us as humanity to really let people know we struggle with a different beast here in America on these issues with Christianity. I think. Plus, it's what I know most. And anyway, I don't know how the conversation went down to this. But
it goes everywhere. These live chats and there's so much to cover. So it covers. But going back to your story, so how long were you a Christian for then? Like, so from teenage years to when?
Right. So I would say that I really had that experience, like the deep experience. I think I was already a Christian growing up, probably from like very young, and there's no telling what age I was when I was already Christian. But I think I had a profound experience when I was in 7th grade. And from 7th grade until, let's see, I was still kind of a Christian when I got clean off drugs. October the 25th will be 10 years off everything. And I would say I deconverted I became much more pantheistic over that year or two of my getting clean. So maybe about 8 years, maybe 7 to 8 years ago, I stopped. So from the age, I think I was like 11 or 12 or something, till I was, well, I'm 36 now, so 20, probably 28,
Wow.
is
They're really
how.
formative years. Yeah.
Yeah, most of my clearly teenage years up into adult years, I was really devout. And when I say, I know that people who have theologies will say you were never one of us or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
That you gotta, your skin gets so thick after a while, where you're just like,
Yeah.
okay, whatever makes you sleep good at night, happy, you can, sure, whatever. I was really crazy, extreme about it. And um, it's who I am as a person. I'm
Right.
very, very extreme in everything that I do. I ran triathlons. When I did sports, I wanted to be the best in my team. I wanted to be the best I could to, outdo myself.
Sure.
And I think the same went for trying to understand the Bible and really understand this experience. And it made me go deep. And it also made me have to change my positions, because Christians who aren't extreme personality wise
Right.
are cool being Baptist for 35 years, raising their family. They go to the same church on Sunday. They're cool. Yeah, Jesus, amen, hallelujah. You want to go to the bar after this and go drink some beer? Hell yeah, let's go to the club. I was like, I was crazy, bro. I was
Right.
really trying to believe what Paul's teaching philosophically about the flesh. I was really trying to understand. I didn't want to go to hell. I was having visions in my dreams about the end of the world. Name it, bro. I was trying to meditate. I'd have these moments where I thought I was seeing God when I was in there worshiping. I was in trance-like states. Like, I was really trying to tap in. And eventually I became more scientific about the text, even within
Right.
Christianity, realizing how many of the Christianities that I had before that were wrong, according to the text. But then I realized you almost come full circle and realize, actually, at the beginning, when I spoke in tongues, that was a common practice in Paul's church. Why is the historical Protestant saying that ended in the first century when that which is perfect was supposed to? I mean, bro, I was just going and doing, and people would mock that. People, when you
Right.
deconvert, they find anything to like straw man you or poison the well. And they'd go, dude, you never had your faith rooted in the rock, in Jesus Christ. You did not really. And I just think they're naive for not really actually tasting the buffet and realizing, dude, this whole thing is human. Like, you can get out of it stuff, but like, it's all men, it's all humans just trying to make sense of the world. And
Right.
so much stuff, man. So much.
No, so I mean, there is a question. I don't know if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. So Archis asks, how do people that take meth post religiosity? Can you finish that thought around like I guess the drug use and then or the addiction and then Christianity?
Well, I didn't do meth. I was more of a downer. I got hooked on opiates, and that may be because I'm already hyper enough.
Yeah.
I don't need uppers. I have done like abused Adderall in my life when I was addicted to stuff. But as far as how do people that take meth, that would be a very subjective question to ask people who are on meth. Because
I think the larger question I think is how does anyone with addiction become religious? And I think religion can be addictive.
Yeah.
Addiction too. Like anything can be an addiction, right? Gambling,
right.
Sex, drugs, food, religion, cultic stuff. I think the question is better stated as like, what makes someone addicted? And I think that is because usually what happens is if you're addicted to something, you shift your addiction to something else. And maybe it's a personality quirk, maybe it's like socioeconomic, and there's a bunch of reasons, but I don't know if there's a definite answer to this anyway.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask that question because someone asked.
I had someone asked me a long time ago, how did you were a Christian, but then you'd get hooked back on drugs. Like, how did you navigate that experience when you would get hooked on drugs? Where did religion go? Where did your belief in Jesus go? It was there, but I could compartmentalize in the struggle, and I could put Jesus on a shelf in the back of my mind and not dwell on it while I was hooked on drugs. And then when I went to try and get off of it, because, there's obviously an experience. The reason someone who's on drugs is constantly returning to it is it's giving them some satisfaction, at least temporarily, but eventually it's self-destructive. And then you try to find a savior from the self-destruction. And so you end up getting on either methadone at a real clinic or methadone called Jesus Christ. And it's another fix that is going to help you satisfy. That's why I think a lot of people would get off drugs, turn to religion, and find that thing that helps them. But for me, I've done that, and it was just like another form of another thing. Yeah. But what happened to me, bro, I don't know how to describe this. You could say, if we were in the Gnostic tradition, you'd be like, dude, he got gnosis. If it's maybe a mystical, esoteric thing, I found myself. Yeah. And I accepted myself. And I love myself. I know that I'm a good person. I believe that. I really know this because I know I care and I want to try and be the best I can, to people. But it's also being comfortable in this skin. And I can look myself in the mirror and go, I don't know. I finally looked at myself and went, it's okay. It's okay. And I believe in myself. I accepted myself. So there were some parables along the way that really hit me with that. One that strikes out, and I always say this, but if you haven't heard it, it might be worth pointing out. God went to make man, whatever God is. Satan hears the conversation of God talking, saying, I'm going to make man intelligent, driven, motivated, all these things. So he says, I'm going to hide God, Satan says, under the mountains. Then man will never find him. Under the rocks of the earth. He thinks about it. Man will be motivated, driven, intelligent, just like the attributes God said. He'll remove the rock, remove the mountain, and find God. I can't hide him there. So then he does the same. He says, I'll hide God beneath the oceans, beneath the sands of the sea.
Yeah.
Man will create an apparatus. He's intelligent, motivated, driven. He'll find God under there. And finally, the final place that Satan, and I'm making this quick, the final place that Satan says I'll hide God is inside of every person. They'll always journey their whole life seeking for God to find the truth, to find the answer. They got to look, they got to do, they got to this. And all they had to do the whole time was just stop and look inside and know it's me. It's okay. That's what happened to me. You could say it's mystical. You could say it's gnosis. You could say it's simply a psychological acceptance of who I am and that it's okay, Derek. And that's where I'm at today. And dude, I haven't had an urge to use drugs for 10 years. I'm free. I don't need any of this escapism in my life, Yeah,
but that's beautiful. I mean, in and of itself, whether it's religious, not religious, I think sometimes these lines are also arbitrary because it's all experience and human experience.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And so you can call it a religious experience or you can call it a non-religious experience. I think it's all just experience. And that's, I think that sometimes the beauty, I think some people not overstate, but I think they overemphasize, at least even in Hindu tradition, around the idea of regular and then supernatural or like whatever. But the Upanishads, that tradition is really about what you just said is you could do all the ritual out here, but if you're not going inside and internalizing that ritual to the self of yourself, like really understanding the core of what consciousness is, your perception, your experience, then you're not actually pushing anything further. You're not getting to know anything, right? You can know all things. So the beauty of what I just say is by knowing the self, all things are known. So by knowing like yourself, what it means is not like you know yourself, suddenly you know physics.
Yeah. Of course.
It's like when you know yourself in the truest sense, everything else seems okay.
I agree.
Yeah,
that's another way of saying it's not. That has more of like an applicable wisdom that that you just described, but it reminds me of the ancient pre-Socratic philosopher. I can't remember the name right now, but man is the measurement of all things. And people have misunderstood it to mean the measurement literally is like, okay, the elbow, like it's not that. It's saying your consciousness, your awareness, and your perception is literally everything. Beyond your perception of everything, that is everything to you. And without that, you don't have anything. So man is the measurement of everything, is actually hinting at what we perceive, experience, and stuff is literally everything that we are. And we need to, you're adding that little layer, I think, of just taking it a little step further of that observation and saying, look, love yourself truly. Once you've accepted who you accept that you are what you are, and you love it, you try to treat yourself well. Therefore, you're going to treat others well. There's going to be something that comes out of that I think makes you copacetic in the world we live in and enjoying this experience. I think as much as you can until you have to say goodbye.
Right. And so there's this text Brihadaranyaka Upanishads where one of the doctrines or the philosophies is he goes through each and every element in the world, not every element, but like, large elements, saying, why is it you like this? It's not for the sake of this you like this, but for the sake of the self you like this. Why is it just goes down ultimately, it's for the very nature of oneself that once you know that self, it's you're loving everything else, treating everything else like you would yourself at the end of the day.
Right.
And so you have to understand, and this is where the philosophy of consciousness as essential foundation of all Indian Vedanta philosophy. There's multiple philosophy, but this Vedanta philosophy says basically all reality is imbued and pervaded by consciousness. And so the world as you experience is in the realm of consciousness. So even the world out there, as much as it is out there, you don't know the out there. You just know it in consciousness.
Right.
So like ultimately, this is philosophic. That's why they have this demarcation between what they call Purusha, which is pure experience, the pure knower, and then Prakriti, which is all that is known. And those things never mix, meaning like the knower never becomes a known in that sense, and the known cannot become the knower. Basically consciousness matters. What they use in modern terms is they never. So in other words, this gets weak. If you want to get into philosophy, it gets way deeper. There's no free will. All this other plays a role. Because then the self, like Derek experience, Derek isn't Derek. It's a self perceiving what it is like to be Derek.
Right.
So it's like this non-passive passive observer observing the nature of the world as it goes along. So cause and effect. There's no God coming in to change the cause and effect nature. This is all the way things work. It's very interesting.
It kind of sounds like idealism in a way, at least some overlap between it.
Some overlap, yeah.
Yeah, it has that kind of perception to me. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know
no one does.
And I think even fundamental before these conversations of are we viewing ourselves, is it a perception or an illusion, a reflection of ourselves, and all the cool philosophy, the lingo jingo. I call it mental masturbation because it's just like fun, like ways to try and perceive the universe and world around us. To me, I think fundamentally what helped me find me was being okay with not knowing, because you're taught you have the truth, the way, the answer in Christianity. And when you finally come to go, I don't know. Actually, now my bubble's popped. I'm really not sure now. Once you get comfortable with not being sure, it's the best way I could describe it. It's a terrible analogy just came to my mind. It was like the whole world around you, you think you know. It's like Bubble Boy. The movie Bubble Boy, or what's the other one with Jim Carrey where everyone's watching him and they're filming him? And
Truman Show.
Truman Show. Okay. The whole world is all understood. You have it all figured out. And then that bubble pops. You start to realize I was wrong. That's the first step. The first step is realizing I do not know. It's the Socrates. It's the famous, I know that I don't know. Once you know that you don't know, the world can radically change. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to realize that it's okay. You won't ever know all
Right.
there is to know. But one thing I think you can is what we've been talking about. Once you get comfortable just with
Yeah.
you,
With you.
that's the one thing you can try to do. And I think the whole world is painted in a different light once you get comfortable with you.
Right.
And then guess what? Oh, that's what makes me completely copacetic. That's what I think what makes me rise up and go, you know what? I made mistakes. I'm going to make more,
Yeah.
but I'm going to do better. I'm going to try to do better. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do that. And you have to be careful, when you walk that line, that you stay in tune with you most of all, because that's how you're going to be the best. And I feel like the commandments, even in the Bible, try to hint at that. Even with all the ugliness that's there, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, mind, soul, everything in you.
Right.
All of these organs that it's listing to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Where in the commandment did it tell you to love yourself? It just says love God.
Yeah.
I like to interpret that commandment in a way, even though I don't believe in the God Yahweh, whatever. Like, I like to interpret that commandment as saying, it's actually trying to say you. That's why he says love God with your heart, with your these things that you are made of, and
Right.
then love your neighbor as yourself. Well, where did it say love yourself? I think the first commandment is kind of trying to hint at that, or at least that's the way I like to interpret it. And so that tradition is not unique. That is not original. That is not unique to this. This is, I think, a very common.
Ubiquitous.
Yes.
It's
and
everywhere.
I think humans should all see that and go, now that's some meat I like to chew on. There's some bone I like to throw out, but there's some meat there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so in your journey, then is this what got you out? Like this acceptance of yourself, and then how did you get there? Like what was the process? Was there anything that you did or just hit you one day? How did that work?
Yeah, I think addiction played a significant role on disrupting the struggle. I had cognitive dissonance. How come I have the Spirit of God, as the text teaches? I am indwelled by the Holy Spirit, which would empower any Christian to overcome the lust of the flesh, the problems that this world creates, and that is addiction. So why is it I can't, be empowered to just overcome addiction when the text is telling me, Paul's saying, the gospels say, Jesus says, and it's not working? My abracadabra prayer, my expectation that God is going to do something here isn't working. And I keep struggling with addiction. And so there was a humbling that the drugs did to me. I was in such a painful, struggling situation. I had my wife kick me out because we had Department of Social Services called on my house, and they were going to inspect and potentially take my children from me. I had my truck repossessed, or it was going to be. I was on probation for a crime that I committed in drug addiction to try and maintain my, my habits were terrible. I have all of this. I'm a felon, bro. I literally struggled so bad. At the end, I'm injecting heroin in my veins. And I say all that to say that humbled the shit out of me to a point where I was a speck on the ground of nothing. I was so broken, so hurt, so belittled in my own experience by my own behaviors and the world around me that I had to reevaluate to survive.
Right.
I literally believed that if I did not change, I'm going to die. Part of that process was saying my actions cannot be like my beliefs cannot be helping my actions. What is it that I'm wrong about in my beliefs? And that this allowed me to free myself from a dogma being told by a particular community that's been telling me I'm demon possessed or I need the Holy Spirit or whatever their excuse was. It wasn't medical. It was spirit. It was this, it was that. And it was really the fact that I struggled with a sincere medical trauma that can be rehabilitated. It was a scientific thing that could be addressed and fixed. And there was psychology involved, of course. But once I got belittled and crushed and realized my beliefs literally contain no power to change my life, and I've done this over and over and over, is when I was able to reconstruct my philosophy. It was like, all right, I'm willing to consider. You got to get to that place. And most people have their walls up and don't struggle with these kinds of things, that when your worldview is fractured like that, they don't usually deal with that, and so they can't discard or replace their philosophy with something else. They just go on about their lives. I was so extreme that it allowed me to reevaluate this thing. And that's why I always say to people who are Christians, look, I don't expect you to get where I'm at. To get there is a very rough, hard road. And the intellectual rigor that you have to do to your own tradition in order to come here, like, come on. I have to be humble. I have to realize that, I don't expect most Christians to ever get to this place, but I do what I do because I believe that I'm on the right track of observing material. So I don't know if I answered your question completely.
No, you did. I mean, but it's. I mean, thank you for the story, because it's some of that can be difficult and to not only experience but then retell and process, and but it also made you the man you are in some senses. That's always a dichotomy, is that experience and the outcome. It can. They can hit heads, but they produce this, right? In some sense, that made you come out, do your show, and I'm guessing your family and you are doing fantastic now and having that deep cohesion. And you go through that valleys and you come out stronger on the metal.
Well, I always tell this when I tell about what made me start questioning the Christian faith.
Yeah,
was I was withdrawing somewhere toward the end of my final year of addiction, and I was addicted for 10 plus years, like maybe 11. Wow. On and off, opiates. Started with basic Percocets and Vicodin, eventually Oxycontin, where I'm sniffing it. Then they changed the formula because so many overdoses.
Was it from a surgery at all? Did you have surgery?
Had a headache.
Were you injured? Okay.
Had a headache, and my mother-in-law handed me a Percocet 5 that had Tylenol in it. And I felt like I was in the clouds. Right. And it was amazing. I was like, wow. Yeah. And that was the moment I remember. The feeling of it, and I was like, ooh, but I didn't go like immediately down the rabbit hole of addiction. It was just
takes a while.
It was a building habit over time, and then your tolerance, and then I'd get clean for a while, Jesus freak, and then back, and then I tried alcohol for a while to try and get away from that, and that I went down and realized I can't do that normal. Like, I can't do shit normal, right? So I get to the end of my road, and I'm withdrawn on the couch, and I come across a YouTube video called Zeitgeist.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah.
It parallels Jesus, right? Now, I don't know critical scholarship at all at this time. I don't know what I'm talking about. But it helped me psychologically, whether or not it's factual or not, which there's a lot of over exaggeration and false data when you get down in the weeds. It did allow me to go, Jesus is on the same playing field as other gods. Yeah. Because Ravi Zacharias wrote his book back in the day that I read, Jesus Among Other Gods. And he puts Jesus on a pedestal, clearly, because he's an apologist for the Christian faith. And all the other gods, let's poo-poo this tradition. Let's show why this isn't. And he acted like he had spoke to monks from Buddhism and the Hinduism and all this to like debunk and act like Jesus has the correct answer and the right one. At this point, I realized, hold on, Jesus is on the same playing field of other gods. And then I met a guy as I was doing good in life who was part of a community of preterists that I was in. Not going to get lost in what that means. It's a ridiculous rabbit hole, but he wanted me to consider something he had to say about Heracles and Samson. And he just says, look at Samson. Who's the strongest man in the world? I'm like, Samson, duh. Like, I know my stories. He's like, no, Heracles. And I'm like, and he's like, well, yes, Samson and Heracles. And I'm like, okay. It was like fundamental child questions. Like you would tell your 3-year-old, like, oh, wow. And then he's like, oh, and Gilgamesh. Oh, and Melkart. And I'm like,
yeah.
Oh my God, what is going on? So he started paralleling them, and
Bhima from the Mahabharata.
See, and we got to talk. I want to learn about this stuff in the East, right? Because this is great with you. But what got me was, the statue with Gilgamesh, barehanded, one arm holding a lion. We've lost the story. We don't have that story anymore. We only have the actual evidence in an inscription of him choking a lion barehanded.
Who does that?
Samson does it. Heracles does it. Melkart does it. All of them do this. And I went, bro, my mind, then the fact that Samson's name means little son, and he has 7 locks of hair, 7 days to a week. He's the sun, right? And Delilah, who gets paid in silver, is the moon. And I started going, oh my God, what if I'm not understanding the hidden kind of it's right under our nose. His name and the stories, even the riddle with the 30 days, they have 30 days, they get 30 pieces of clothing. Like that's the calendar. Like I started going, what if this myth is more than just a story about a love-hate relationship between Philistines and Israelites? And here's one of the judges of Israel and the struggle of his sins and all that. All that's
Right.
there. Don't get me wrong. What if it's reflecting an astronomical aspect observed? And this author is far more brilliant than I ever perceived as a believer. So my deconversion was actually finding more beauty, more new interpretations within the Bible. So I could land the plane of literalism and then start to actually become a pantheist. And I thought God was bigger than just the Bible. So then God actually was everywhere and everything. And that was where I went with it. The power and strength of God weakened in my ideological like struggles about flesh and all the doctrines and stuff. That started to dissipate. What happened was freedom to explore. And that, I'm telling you, that was so healthy for my mental health, so healthy for me to be able to do whatever. I'm a free man. I can do what I want, explore what I want. And eventually it was more science, if you will, that made me question whether there's really any metaphysical reality to this stuff that's being argued. And more so, are these human projections and human traditions? And so whether there's metaphysical, I don't know, but I always tell my good friends who finally have followed me this far out, if there is something, he's cool with me. Like it's cool with me. She's cool with me.
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? That's where I'm at today, bro.
No, but that's a great, fantastic like story, because I think it does encapsulate what a lot of people go through, right? And a lot of people don't. And I had wished, like some sense, like people have the ability to, within their religious traditions, to be like, maybe religion's not going to give me the answers, because maybe religion wasn't supposed to give me the answer for this particular issue. Maybe there's somewhere else I need to go, right? And the thing is, sometimes people think religion is the panacea, right? The cure-all for everything.
Yeah.
You're like, that's not what it's meant for. It's just like, it's not there to solve the problems of every aspect of our lives, but it is there to give us some level of meaning if you're looking for that. Some people don't need it. Some people are just like, hey, they're cool going on the world doing their thing, and that's fine. But I think your story for me is very like, it's moving, just because it's shown this growth in your life that has coincided with you not fixing in any way, but coming to terms with who you are, and being okay with the flaws, the problems, the issues, and all the great stuff too. And I think that's what religion should do. It shouldn't make you feel guilty about your thoughts, because thought is not a crime. A thought is a thought. Like me punching someone, stabbing someone, doing that's a crime.
Clearly.
But like, that should be condemnable. But like, suffering you go internally should not be treated as if that's something coming from God, right? Or it's like, or it's demonized by God. I mean, he put it there if you believe in that tradition. I mean, whatever. So it's you accept the pain, the suffering, the love of others, and I think that's it seems like you got into that place where you're way more in touch with that aspect of yourself.
I try to be. Yeah. I feel like I am much more than I previously was, but there's always been a sense of me where I've always, it reminds me kind of the story of Buddha. One of them where he's at the palace and he sees a bird fly down and just rip up a worm from the ground that had been tilled, and watched the bird kill the worm and felt, sorry. He felt sorry for, what is this? What are we in? And I remember BB hunting as a kid. I'd shoot a squirrel and it would be twitching, or catching a fish and having to hit it on the head with a rock to eat it and cook while we were camping. I'm being honest. Like maybe if I was desensitized at a young age and dad literally was always hunting with me and I got out of that, I felt bad for that life, that thing. And I've always had that, but I do think that sometimes these systems that we call religion, they're systems that distract us from just plain old school experiencing and trying to just be you kind of experience of religion. For me, I think it has a purpose. It serves a purpose, like you said.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, here's the show, here's the system, here's what you got to do. And I think those remnants of like, okay, I have to bow down 5 times a day or else, or these that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's I could see it easily being what distracted me all along about Christianity. And
but I mean, like with anything, these are two-edged swords, right? Because they do instill a sense of discipline. It's a sense of structure and like means for people to understand the rules within that game, right? Like, and how to interact with each other there. But it also can be handcuffs, right?
Yeah.
Because if it comes too close, you're like in a prison. Where ideally it should be like a big hall in which people are engaging with, and there's rules there, but it becomes smaller. And like when you see people when they get cramped up, there's always head-to-head confrontations, as opposed to when you let them open up, and then people could do their own little cliques in the area, but they're all accepted. And I think this is where sometimes religion can have that negative impact. Well, I do think, like, I don't agree with like Dawkins or Hitchens, like religion's evil, it poisons everything. It can. I mean, like, especially when it's the only game in town. Like, I think that's where the problem is. Like when there's no other real other contenders that it has to compete with. Which I mean, nowadays Christianity does have to compete with secularism, with materialism, and with scientism too. But the problem is, like, some of those things, other traditions like scientism, materialism, or secularism, don't provide that meaning that people are looking for, but it gives you really good tools to live in the world.
Yeah, I think something that you said made me think of beyond religion, because what do we mean by religion? Of course, we didn't define our term.
Yeah.
But I see it beyond religion. I see it in politics, and you almost want to say it in religion or social standings and stuff. The same mentality of tribalism is the best way I'd like to put it, but also it's much more than just tribalism. It's these systems of expectations and stuff. It's everywhere. It's beyond religion. That's why I don't agree with the sentiment that it's only like religion's only harmful. There's much more that goes beyond that. Nationalistic tendencies, or even think tanks or group thinks that you must be like this in order to be part of our club completely. And you don't allow that plurality of thought or differing, positions. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on. I've learned that as I've deconverted in lots of communities that I've participated with. They have their own purity test and their own kind of dogma that they are saying, this is, you fit and you're welcome here if you have these things. And I've never been like, when I wanted to be free, I wanted to be free. That didn't mean that I didn't have like lines I drew in the sand, clearly hateful people. But this, I see the same mentality that I saw in religion. Oh, you're not one of us. You're not really a Christian. You're not, the same.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to be universal with clear lines in the sand that I think, we almost everyone would probably agree that this is not good, but it's getting.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing is, like, but this is the nature of human and societal relationships. You do have to have tribes. You do, like, your family's your tribe. And then, like, if you and another family have issues, you choose your family, right? I mean, the tribalism is just extending that circle a bit more. Universalism is really taking that circle and saying it's all one family.
I don't mean like to that sense. I think there's a purposeful structure and what works, right? Too big and it stops working at all. But and I get it. Or
you can't function in the world. I mean, so with the Hindu tradition, it's like this idea is, once you become that place where you say, I give up all ties and attachment, I become one for everybody, you become an ascetic. You're no longer like, you don't have ties. Like most in the Hindu tradition, what happens is when you decide to become ascetic, you conduct your own funeral. So to get rid of your old self. You're no longer that being.
It's like a baptism. in a sense.
Yeah.
You're dying with him, and you're rising, putting on new clothing.
Right, but that new clothing is not connected to anyone. You don't have a mother anymore, or father anymore. You're in at least social ties wise. Obviously, biologically you do, but like just the social ties. You like, for example, the rules: you can't sleep in one place for 3 days in a row. You have to keep moving. It's just this idea that attachment, in that sense, makes you tribalistic.
Well,
so
that you said you don't have a father anymore, right? I get it, but technically you do. That sounds like Christianity. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
You literally have a new father in heaven, if you will.
Right.
It's you cut off, you must love me more than your father, your mother, sister, brother. Jesus teaches these ideas. And I do wonder how much of the East made its way into the Roman Empire, and some of these ideas potentially have influence.
Well, there definitely did. I mean, there was definitely interaction, obviously mediated through the Persians. But on this particular issue, the difference, I think, is not that you get a universal father, you're trading one father for the other.
Right.
It's this idea that you are the Atma, or the self, and your self is not tied to the body. And being tied to that body ties you to other bodies, but you're actually tied all selves as one.
But that sounds like the Gospel of Thomas.
Yes.
In
so
a
there's
sense.
elements here. Yes.
Yeah.
So like when you get to like certain aspects of so Pythagoras was influenced deeply by Eastern tradition, by the way. So he talks about, Gymnosophist coming from India. They might have been Jains or Hindus. We don't know yet. I mean, we don't have enough data here as to what was actually transferred over. But especially from the time of Alexander onwards, there was so much more mediation happening.
Right.
And so historic ancient past you did, because you still find in the Roman Empire, you find, terracotta stuff from India, right? So there's trade going on. If there's trade going on, ideas are going around.
Come on. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So on this point, I want to jump to another position is,
okay.
So we've gone through your story so far. What made you start doing this?
Dude, you know what? It comes down to this. How many channels do you watch that you're a fan of that you wish you had more content on that issue? Like,
yeah,
I went through a phase when I was going through the deconversion. I got fascinated with these people. For example, remember I was influenced by Zeitgeist. Well, Zeitgeist was inspired by Acharya S. Her name was D.M. Murdoch, right? She was a mythicist. And I was listening to a guy named Miguel Connor. He's a Gnostic on YouTube. He's been around for a long time. It was very nice to me. I reached out. Dude, I didn't even have a channel. And I contacted him. Finally, he reached out to me. He was very nice, and he gave me time of day. And we talked. And he was friends with her. The guy who told me about Samson, Hercules, Melkart, he knew her before she died of cancer.
Yeah.
So I came out of a very fringe-ish, if you will, view of these things, though there is overlap with real scholarship in a lot of the stuff. So it wasn't like everything is, clearly mistaken or whatever. There's a lot of good that came out of learning this. Yeah. And I came across Robert M. Price. And I really fell in love with these talks, these interviews. One was, for example, Thomas L. Jefferson was even questioning the historicity of Jesus at one point. And there were letters between him and other presidents that could not, they're like, dude, if this got out, it was really cool stuff for me to go like, what? Hold on, the presidents? The founding fathers? I thought this was a Christian nation. No, right? So I'm at work. I'm a construction worker who went from junkie, I was screwed up on drugs, to working for my family, and it was traveling for work. And I worked up the ranks because I'm a hard worker. Labor-wise, bro, I try to compete. I try to outdo, I'm competitive. And I'm listening to these podcasts for hours and hours a day with Bluetooth in my head while I'm working, but I'm hiding it. My boss can't see that I'm running equipment or whatever, I'm doing it. And I moved up to a supervisor position because I was very good at this. And it was heavy equipment. We were doing solar panel fields, going out installing solar panels. So if you're driving down the road, you look on the highway and there's thousands of solar panels. That's a field. That's me. That was what I did. And I'm watching guys, but now I have Bluetooth in my head, and I can, because I need my contact for scholars, but my supervisors need to get a hold of me. Boom. Yeah. Well, I'm just rocking podcast after podcast for a year and a half, 2 years doing this, and I'm running out of material. I'm actually catching up to everything that has been out about these people. Every Bible geek, every Miguel Connor episode, Richard Carrier. Like I'm starting to tap into a broader sphere of things, but it's running out of juice.
Right.
Where the hell is this good stuff that I want to hear more of? And then it dawned on me: bring your computer to work. I brought my computer to the hotels that I was traveling in, my Mac, and I'm sitting in hotel rooms with the worst internet. If you go back to the beginning of MythVision's videos, they're the choppiest, crappiest. I don't know really what I'm talking about, and I'm not really up to speed about this stuff. I'm entertaining hypothesis that, Romans invented Christianity and all sorts of fun, cool, interesting ideas. And I'm a pantheist at this time, by the way. I'm still I didn't call myself that. Yeah. I was just like, God's bigger. And I was like, we need more of this. So I just, not for money, not to even make this a thing. I was just like, I know there's someone out there who wants to hear an update of this person or new ideas. So I started recording them. And when I got a chance, I'd upload them. And finally, I'm doing that enough that I finally relocate. Life hits. Things happen in my life, right? Where I'm no longer going to work at this place. They're not treating me right. Other stuff in my life's happening. We relocate. And I start working for a rehab in California where I'm helping drug addicts get help from addiction, keeping them from dying. Wow. So I had another YouTube channel I had already had where I just was expressing, hey, it's day 26. I'm clean from drugs and alcohol. You can do it. Don't give up on yourself. You can do it. I believe in you. These were my messages. And it wasn't for fame either, but it grew and it got enough attention that a rehab hired me and I was making good money working from home. I had a lot of time on my hands, a lot of time to do podcasts. So I started doing recordings with Robert Price. I started doing recordings with new people I found. And I was like, whoa, I never knew that. There's a new person here. There's a new idea here. There's a new book. And I was still obsessed with learning more about stuff. I'm giving you the whole skinny here just to get an idea.
No, I love this.
Eventually, COVID hits.
Yeah.
My MythVision channel is making some money, like not enough to survive off of, but some money. And it just dawned on me, what if you could double down? What if you could put all your eggs in this, Derek, and truly commit and potentially be able to do this from home? You love this stuff. And they always say, you never worked a day in your life if you did what you love, right?
Yeah.
So COVID hit. I applied for unemployment because they let us go because the airplanes, like first of all, the travel and trying to get an addict from another state to fly to California to go to a rehab to try and get rehabilitation. Dude, the logistics was so bad that they fired us. They let us go, if you will. And so I applied for unemployment, didn't see it for like 8 months because everyone in the United States was practically in the same pickle. Right. And I just begged and said, look, if you like this, support us, join us, become a patron. I worked so damn hard, bro, that I lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is an hour from where Robert Price lives. I would drive to this guy who has 2 PhDs, an encyclopedia of knowledge with nothing but bookshelves in almost every room that you walk into on his first story house. And I just started to just vibe with him and learn from him. And we've rekindled all of that, by the way, now. And we're back to friendship and everything that's happened because there's been a bunch of drama in history that's happened. But like that, I think, is what put me not only able to do this full time, but also the reason is that I wanted more of this. And once you tap into it, you realize it's an endless treasure trove of insight. I'm going to be 80 years old going, I did not know this about the Eastern tradition. Wow, we just found a new archaeological find over here in Greece. Oh my gosh, Egypt, they just found a tomb and guess who it was? Like, it's never going to end, bro.
No, and it's so cool. I mean, like this journey. So when did you start like reading the books and like, so you talked about podcasts, but you know a lot. It's not like your information is podcast only. It's like you've read original sources, original texts. When did you like, because like you said, you're a construction worker, you're a layman.
Translations of them.
Translations, but you're like construction worker, you're layman.
Right.
Like this is kind of crazy to jump into this level of scholarship. And this is not easy stuff, by the way. This is like, it's philosophy, it's archaeology, it's textual criticism. It's really deep work. So how did that happen? And like, it's part of that whole thing where
I um well, when I was first starting it and I was working construction, it was all just podcasts. I didn't read
Yeah.
these books because, dude, I would be drained. 12-hour days in the sun, cooking
Yeah, yeah.
and running men. And I was a supervisor, so I had to make sure they were responsible from 5 a.m. till we got to our hotels 7 to 8 p.m. Sleep, wake up, do the same thing. And it was like that for years. It was really once I went full time, I think, with this platform that, well, maybe a little before that, I would read some of these books, but like
Yeah.
I think, started actually making it part of the full-time job. And it is my responsibility that if I'm going to communicate an idea with you as an academic, this was my kind of personal rule that I had for myself, is that I don't want to interview someone that I haven't at least indulged their work to some degree. I do not want to go, oh, for example, whether or not Dan McClellan, will appear to do an interview at some point on this book or not. Like, I am not going to interview him unless I've read some
That's
of
right.
this book. Some.
That's right.
Most of the scholars, I am the guy who doesn't just like gloss over and look for a chapter. I tend to start from the beginning of books and work through them, unless I'm trying to reference something. And it became a habit that I need to know what they're saying. And there was a sense of like, you get like a placebo hit when you're interviewing the scholar and you say something and you know that they know that you had to have known their work.
Yeah.
And it felt good to me to know that their work is important enough that I actually recognize what they said and am impressed by something they said. It
Right.
makes them, all the hard work they did, all the sweat, blood, and tears they put into the ink in that book, they go, wow. Like, this guy is not a typical Joe just going, oh, great book. Bible tells me so. What's the book about? No. I know what the book's about, and the world needs to know. Let's get into the deep, juicy stuff. And I try to be, that's my science, right? I want to be unique in my interview style, people person, but bringing out some of those golden nuggets. And that's what inspired me to start reading more and more. And then eventually I saw this scholar disagree with that scholar. The same problem I had with Christianity, where, oh, you're Baptist? Oh, you only immerse, you don't sprinkle? Oh, you mean it's predestination and not free will? Oh, it's speak in tongues, don't speak in tongues? Oh, it's once saved, always saved? Oh, you can lose your salvation? Like, all of those discrepancies I found amongst academics. And then I went, okay, hold up. Now, which academic is seemingly closer to the truth here, and why? Based on my own observations as a non-expert, but I'm able to read. The problem I find with a lot of scholars that I talk to today, they're really good at this, like at their
tiny
field,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
Like, they are the shit at this thing, right? But then, like, they don't eat at a buffet every day like I do. They don't get the picture of all there is. And that's what makes me go, okay, I may not be an expert. I'm a jack of many observations here, but it allows me to get a bigger, broader, and see, I think, blind spots that they don't. And they see blind spots, which makes them hold the positions they do that I can't, because I don't know the languages and I don't have a specialty in that area. So we bring something unique to the table. And anyway, I just went off on a rambling.
No, it's fantastic. Have you ever thought about going to get a PhD yourself or anything like that? Or has it crossed your mind?
Thought about it, but the time and energy and focus that would go into a program like that, I don't know what I would want to specialize a particular thing in. If I did anything, bro, honestly, I would probably just want to be a comparative mythologist, because the thing that freed me was the human narrative at large.
Right.
That would be it. I would want to take the craft of someone like Sir James George Fraser, Joseph Campbell, guys that have done this comparative mythology with the most modern, cutting edge understanding of things, without getting so lost in the sauce of trying to act like there isn't any connections, because a lot of scholars will do that, and see the unity and actually find where there really seems to be those connections. And that would be the thing I think I would want to do. But at this point right now, I got to provide for my family. I have to do what I can to feed them. Maybe one day when there's more leisure.
Yeah.
Because that's what gave us time to get into philosophy. In fact, agriculture, allowed us to store up food, so we had time to think.
Thank
I
you. That's right.
I need that time in order to be able to put into some program like this, and I don't have it because I'm trying to take care of my wife and kids, and that's the
Yeah,
number one thing right now.
no, that's a fair point. I mean, like I want to get my PhD probably after I've get done being a lawyer, and then hopefully that's in the next like 5-10 years, and I can go be a late PhD person. I'm older than you. I'm like 30. I'm 45, so I got.
You're not that old.
I mean, not that old, but I'm getting there.
You're young. You got time.
But yeah, I'll probably go get my PhD at some point. I do read and write Sanskrit and a few other languages. I just I'm not really great at it. I don't have practice time. It's just. But this is something that a passion I would love doing that. I like talking to you, talking to the scholars, like similar way that you approach your interviews. I do that. Like I make sure I read as much as I can of any author before they come on. Well, I might read more of one particular work because I'm really interested in that particular like work or article, whatever. I try to pull in as much information on the author or scholar. And I think the fact is spaces like yours and like mine and Gnostics, we're giving no one ever heard these scholars before. Like they would have been stuck in some academic shelf only talked about by like 100 people in the world, and those ideas would never percolated out. But like I do think that the work that you guys are doing is so important to get ideas out into the mix quicker, faster, and with better engagement. Like no idea is a good idea unless it's tested and it's pushed back against, and it's either reified or or collapses or it gets revised, right? And that helps that process when you do that. Give me 1 second. My dogs wanted to come in the house.
You're fine. You're fine. Yeah, no problem. Hey, everybody in the chat. Hope everybody's doing well. Hit that like button. Hit that like button. I don't know who Jonathan is. It Paige? I don't know. Math. I'd have to look them up, Naveen, and see what
Jonathan Hageo. He's on Jordan Peterson's channel. He talks about the symbolic interpretation of the Bible and Genesis. And
I've seen his face before. I don't know who he is. Interesting. Okay, I'll look into him. I'll look into him. He's like Jordan Peterson, where it's like metaphors and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But I think a lot of that is I think he kind of makes it up. It's not like either linguistically justified or symbolically justified in terms of the language or culture or society. It just kind of, like for example, when that's exactly what Jordan Peterson does. By the way,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's just like let me pull it out of the ass. There's no, I haven't read the text in its original language, so I don't know what the word actually means. Or like, for example, like the statement you made about Samson Delilah, right?
Right.
That's built into the text. So this idea of the sun and the moon and the relationship of the work week. So if you look at even Hindu texts or even look at even like Hesiod, but Rome's don't eat that food. Go. So when you look at Hesiod or anyone else, the language plays such an important role in the symbolic understanding of these deities and the stories, right? Like in the Hindu tradition, like for example, like Indra, Vritra, the words mean the thing that they're trying to reflect. Vritra means obstacle, the obstructor.
Right.
Indra is, the etymology of Indra is people really don't know, but he's connected to he's a storm god. So, or the god of rains. So his war with Vritra is breaking up the storm clouds so the rain comes. So these stories, like the cows historically mentioned in the Vedic text, are actually clouds, right? So there's these parallels that's ancient, goes back based on language. So if you don't know that, when you make a symbolic engagement, you're just like pulling it out of your ass.
Yeah, Genesis seems to kind of do that. I'm not saying every character is every character is like a natural phenomena, but even like Isaac meaning laugh, or the character's name implies the story's themes and elements, and that's biblical. I think there's something to that. I think like what Jordan Peterson does though is like he'll sometimes just find a meaning a meaning that he can make
Yes.
the text mean, if that makes sense. And I prefer, for me, like I
Yeah.
could see pastors glean or do that to give a lesson, and they use their tradition in a way that tries to like reflect those
Right.
things. You know what I mean? But I also can see, like, I'm more of like, what does a text seem to possibly mean from the author themselves, and what hidden things might be there that we don't know or don't see today. You know what I mean?
Right, because there's context we just don't understand, right? Like
Yeah,
given
yeah.
our worldview. So now that you've done this podcast, like what has been your, I think, what would you say is your crowning achievement, or your, so far to this day, like the best interview you've done with a scholar, and why do you think that's the case?
Oh, the best interview, bro. That's impossible for me to answer, in my opinion. There's
Right.
been some really, really good ones. Oh man, that's like saying, like, what is your absolute favorite food or your absolute favorite song?
Yeah, that's true.
Or like,
Yeah.
it's so subjective, and it depends on the mood, and it depends on the thing. Maybe you help me out. Help me out with this question by making the question a little more specific, and then
So,
like,
actually, let me rephrase. I love the fact you got to speak to Ellen Pagels, and I
oh
think
yeah,
that was like, I think, and even Paula Fredrickson, these amazing scholars that, I have their work sitting on my library here, and I read them, and I just, so when you talk to like Ellen, like Dr. Pagels, she just seems like a lovely person, like such a
she is,
sweet, lovely person.
bro.
And but the knowledge she has, and I feel like she gets vilified so much by the other side, and like very strong Christians around her work. But yeah, I don't know.
That's
I was
weird
moved by
to
that.
me.
Yeah,
My wife and her like click. Ryan,
yeah,
so Elaine like literally will talk to Ryan about makeup and like, what do you recommend for my eyeliner? And like they're like bonding on that level. And I'm much more like business, you know me. I'm like, okay, so
yeah,
the Gnostic said what? Like that's how I am. I'm all like
yeah,
business
yeah.
all the time. She's more like, okay, girl, no girl, this is what you, that's how they got it, right? But here's what's funny about what you just said. Elaine is very religious, like
Yes,
extremely devout. Okay. Like some of her, I don't even, I am like far more critical, of course, about the tradition and things than
yeah,
she is. She is much more sympathetic to the church fathers. And what's
yeah,
ironic is I call her a Gnostic. She's fine with the label, but in reality, she visits an Orthodox form of church. Like,
yeah,
she is a Gnostic sympathizer slash like believes the Gospel of Thomas, believes the teachings that we were talking about
right,
earlier. And I told her I'm a skeptic. I'm more Darwinian in my mind, if you will, Elaine, like your dad,
right.
because we talked about how her father was an atheist and Darwinian and stuff. And she goes, "That's okay. You're a Gnostic to me." And I'm like, you know what? I love that because she
Right,
knows when I speak to her about this, she's like, that's the thing though, Derek. You see it, that's enough. That's enough for me to
right,
recognize that like you are a spiritual human being and you don't
right.
realize it. While I use different language, I may not use spiritual. I
Sure.
get it. I get it, right? Like so it was really cool to see that and then her tell me the kind of vitriol she receives from Christians when
Right.
honestly, if you are on the skeptic side or the Christian side, she is so much closer to them than they even realize. It's
Right.
insane, to be honest with you. And I love her all the more for it. I'm glad she's different. I'm glad that she is not groupthink, exactly skeptic like me. Like, I want to be more friends with more people who are like that, who also then recognize the limitations of and go, yeah, virgin birth, like you should have saw her
Yeah.
face. I start talking about resurrection. She thinks maybe something's there, doesn't know what to, she's kind of like, I think some miracles happen. Then I go, virgin birth. She goes, that didn't happen. Like and I'm like, yeah, you know what I mean?
No, I mean, so like, there's a funny comment. I think they're making fun of my question. They're like, "Who's your favorite child,
Oh,
Derek?"
don't you dare. Oh, don't you dare, decades. I love all of them. My wife will say, though, you treat the youngest the most caring and the most like I baby him. But that
Yeah.
comes with age when you mature. Because my oldest, I was 18. I didn't know what
Oh,
it meant to be I didn't know what it meant to be a man, let alone a father at 18. Like,
Your oldest kid's 18 too now?
yeah, my oldest is 18, my middle son's 15, and the other one's 11, about to be 12. And he gets like all the spoil, like it's terrible. It's terrible. I'm too much of a pushover now, but it happens when you grow up, you mature. That's why I was like, when my mom and dad show so much like leniency and kindness and my kids, and I'm like, the hell? You didn't do that for me.
That's right.
And it makes sense why. It makes sense as you older you get, the more you learn, the more you try, you know.
I got 3 kids, oldest 18, she's off to college next year, and the twins are 15, going to be 16. But yeah, I mean, I'd say depending on the day of the week, one of them is my favorite, and the other 2 are not. And they're all girls, so they all hate me at some point during the month when I tell them rules and you can't be home earlier and all that crap. But yeah, I mean, so okay. Now in this journey, what has been the biggest thing that you were shocked to learn in your studies, in your engagement? Or is that also a similar type of question that I asked before?
I mean, they're all similar, but like, it depends on, I'll put it this way. I think what shocked me the most, what was the catalyst that I think shocked me the most, and to this day is still shocking, but the power of the shock is not like as impressive to me like it was, because after years of talking about it, you kind of go, okay, it's not gonna like hit you the same way. I worshipped this man that I believed really walked the earth, named Jesus, whom we call Jesus the Christ, right?
Yeah.
And I was then told he might not have even walked the earth. He may not have even ever been really born. There may not have been a guy who you think is God in the flesh.
Right.
He may not have ever even existed at all.
Right.
When you hear that for the first time, you either laugh because these insane idiots, right? Because you're so caught up in now this guy walked the earth, or if you take it seriously, you really are like blown away at, oh my gosh, there's a chance this guy likely didn't exist or could have not existed. It really, it's almost ironic, and it makes you almost chuckle. Like 2 billion plus people on the planet believe this guy who never probably existed. You can't tell me there's not a bigger conspiracy on planet Earth if that's the case. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how I felt about it. And yeah, that's I mean, that would be probably the thing. Then there's also shockers like Judaism's origins with Jonathan Adler, or like,
I want to get into this, by the way. I don't know you. I know you don't have that much more time. You have to go sometimes.
You're fine. I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one thing I want to ask is, I want to make a comment, is I think it's so interesting that we're so caught up in whether something happened or didn't happen.
Yep.
And it's not that we care that it happened or didn't happen. It's, do I know? Right. It's more about us knowing if it happened or didn't happen.
Yep.
Like, Jesus could have entirely existed, but why does my knowledge of that matter? I don't know. So this is where it's like, it's interesting to me, is because if there's a truth about Jesus, whether he existed or doesn't exist in the world, it should not matter.
So
because
you're hitting something. You're hitting something, because you weren't a radical fundamentalist Christian.
Yeah.
And that prior experience is why it's so shocking. This is not an up for debate or even possibility in the mindset of a fundamentalist. This guy is God, the one and only Son, part of the Trinity. And we are so narcissistically told about our only one and only truth. And once you discover this and you take it seriously, not as a mocking apologist who constantly just wants to derail people from considering it, that is a shocker. I don't know if there's an equivocal analogy to your religion, but from the East, but like, dude, you're right. It shouldn't matter. And now I look back, the reason why the shock isn't there is because at this point I'm like, yeah, this seems to be like, if I was born a Buddhist and discovered about the scholarship, I'd be like, oh yeah, maybe Jesus didn't exist or something. I mean, I hear that talk happens in Buddhist circles. Like maybe Buddha was a fictitious character at the start. Like
For most Buddhists don't care, by the way.
right,
They wouldn't
most
care.
don't care. This matters in a post-enlightenment world, United States, kind of maybe even broader, but mostly in the United States, conservative Christians. This guy existed. We want a historical faith.
Right.
We want this one happened. The C.S. Lewis, all those other myths pointed to Jesus, but this is the true myth. And what they mean by true is it happened. If you went back with a camera, Jesus walked out of that empty tomb. It is the one and only true. And when that's all you know, boom! I mean, your brain explodes because you're like, this guy probably didn't even exist. It's such a shell shock. It's a bubble boy again.
But it's interesting to me because there's like this hierarchy of truth they're playing with, which is if it happens out here in the world, it's truer than if it happens in here.
Right.
Like so it's weird. Like you could say, I love my wife. There's no way for me to do that externally. It's all up here. The love I have, the respect, the loyalties, all in my being. It's the truest experience I know. Like, yeah, I know the chairs out there, but that's no less true than the love of my wife in my head. So if Jesus is true, even in the ultimate spiritual sense that you're talking about, whether he
physical, even like
whether he walked the earth physically or not, is you should be able to have that experience of Jesus, and that truth is no less true than him walking on the road. But the problem is, at some level, the claim has to be that this is the most unique thing in human history. This is the most unique tradition in human history. This is the only way to truth. And somehow, like, people have to engage with the fact that God is like, he kind of chooses best friends as opposed to like being open to all humanity and loving all. He's just, no, if you're with my tribe here, then you're good. Otherwise, screw off.
Think about all the building blocks that the way that we have interpreted our tradition. Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies.
Yeah.
Because one of the stipulations within the Bible is this idea, even in the Hebrew Bible, is this idea that if a prophet predicts something is supposed to come to pass and it doesn't happen, he's a false prophet. Well, Christians, look at that. Like, Jesus actually lived out these prophecies. They have like a fortune cookie interpretation of. But then it's also like it needed to happen. He could give a spiritual Nostradamus, whatever it means, ambiguous. But like, he gives, like, you will see these things. Historical prophecy plays a role within Christian theology. And
from Isaiah, from Jeremiah, Daniel.
It's rooted in what actually historically is supposed to happen.
Right.
And this gives the apologists kind of this leg up, like ours happened, yours didn't, kind of thing.
Right.
Modern apologists. Notice the early apologists didn't do that, like Justin Martyr. They weren't making historiological arguments like I am right now. It's post-enlightenment. It's rationalist post-enlightenment we've all been tainted by that makes us require historical veracity or whatnot in order to show how provable, how true it is. And that's what it really boils down to. But that's why it's such a shocker, though, because you're being told this thing, like Bubble Boy's told by his mother. The Bubble Boy I watched isn't the older version. It was the newer one where he's
Jake Gyllenhaal.
I think
the Bubble Boy.
He was the Bubble Boy, and his mom's like, if you leave this bubble, you die. And the whole movie he's rolling around in a bubble, and it pops.
Yeah.
It doesn't die, right?
It doesn't die.
Yeah, it's like Plato's cave. It's the same thing. So that's
the Bubble Boy I liked was in Seinfeld. The Seinfeld Bubble Boy was so funny. I don't know if you've seen that episode. You check out the Seinfeld Bubble Boy episode.
Okay.
It's George is fantastic. But no, so I want to take there's a thought I left that I want to come back to is history of Judaism, man. It is fascinating. Like until I got started reading or listening to you and Neil, the fact that the oldest tradition of Moses and isn't until like the 5th or 6th century is mind blowing.
Yeah, it's complicated because
Yeah.
internally, so we have to be very nuanced because
Yeah.
I've had these disputes with my friends. Kip Davis has argued with me
Yeah.
over this with Neil. You get Exodus motifs in the Bible,
Yeah.
even from like archaized Hebrew, which seems to be old. It seems to be, and most scholars, I suspect, assume it is. There are
Yeah.
some who challenge that, but the seems overwhelmingly they think there's an old tradition of Exodus motif. Now, this shouldn't be a shocker
Sure.
because even if you look at the Hyksos, okay, there are Exodus kind of motifs where the Hyksos are expelled from Egypt and travel into the reign where we're seeing with the Phoenicia, Canaan
Right.
land, right? So it's not like people weren't coming to and fro and experiencing these things. And maybe these poems are reflecting an old motif that just ends up happening again when they are relocated back into Babylon after being captured, and then they're able to go back from Persia once Persia captures Babylon, back to go rebuild in the land by Cyrus. So
Right.
there's this internal argument, and the internal argument is usually this prophet Hosea says in chapter 8 or whatever chapter, and Hosea wrote this in the 8th century BCE. And it gets so in the weeds, bro, because you get a scholar who comes on like Gad Barnea who's like, you know how much these texts have been played with more than priests have little boys. You know, I'm being bad analogy, but just trying to give you one. They have been messed with, redacted, edited, tweaked, changed, updated for so long and so much that people like Gad Barnea are extremely critical of assuming this is 8th century, right? Because it's an assumption based on other reasons of thinking on why you might date Hosea to that period. If Hosea really did write that at that time period, then you already have a Moses kind of tradition happening back in the 8th century. Externally to the Bible, we get no mention of anything Moses related at all that is Moses, the name or anything, till the 4th century BCE, right? Which, you know, scholars go, that's not unreasonable in light of a few scribes that might be passing along this tradition for hundreds of years in a small corner. That's an assumption, though, because where we do have writings like Elephantine in Babylon and even in Persia, where people like Jonathan Adler have dug up and Gad Barnea echoes the sentiment. And then I've had other scholars who've come on who also think, hey, there's no awareness of the Bible, they say, in Elephantine, right? So if they did, they'd mention names, Jacob, any characters, Jacob, Moses, you name it, and they don't. They have what looks to be a proto-Passover motif, absent the Exodus of Egypt motif. There's no condemnation of Egypt. There's no plagues. But it is a Passover motif. But that just is an older tradition that seems older than what we get in our Bible that has an Exodus Moses character kind of final polished redacted version. And it doesn't have awareness of the Bible. There's other negative confirming evidence they say that we don't know. Like when they write to Jerusalem, you know, one of the scholars I had on said they should have said, you heretics, you're on your own. I'm not helping fund a new building of a temple in a whole new location because the law says XYZ, Jerusalem's the spot. Why would I send you funds to build a temple down here where the wife of God, Anat, and various other deities are mentioned alongside Yahweh? Are you kidding me? So they wouldn't have sent funds, but guess what they did historically? They sent funds. They helped them. So like, it's a crazy, crazy muddy thing, but I tend to think Moses, the character, was invented later, and grant that there is absolutely a long, ongoing motif of exile and coming back and stuff that may have been going on because, dude, we get this motif even in Homer. Think about it. Odysseus goes to a faraway land. He's trapped in a faraway land, fighting, trying to make it back home. That motif, that mythic and potentially historical reality to many people groups, especially when the collapse of the Bronze Age took place, bro, it is not even a shocker to me that they probably had a common mythic motif drawn into narratives and poetry and stuff that go way, way back there. I just think the character of Moses was invented much later. And that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards that nowadays with the more stuff I'm reading and listening to you guys. But I'm not an expert here. I could spend more time on that and figure that out. But I do think it seems to be like not only do you talk about elephantine, isn't it also the case that in the records that we have of let's say outside of papyri or manuscripts, that we don't find really any evidence or conversations around the Exodus still was occurring, like the motif of the Exodus, right? Because there was historically an engagement between the population in Judea and
Egypt.
Israel with Egypt.
Yeah.
So, but the mention of Moses isn't happening until much, much later when the narrative structure, it seems like, comes into place after the Babylonian captivity and where some of these ideas also play out.
Yeah, I don't look. Who am I? I'm not an expert. Right. Okay, I need a disclaimer for anyone who's watching at all. Yeah. I'm literally just echoing the sentiments that I tend to lean into. But guess what? Derek is not dogmatic about this. If Hosea did mention awareness of Moses is 8th century. It still wouldn't place him in the 13th century BCE,
right?
Around the Bronze Age collapse. But think about that too. The Bronze Age collapse, where Egypt ruled the world practically and had control over this very region that the story motif takes place. You can't rule out a cultural memory of some type of something and other things fused in. Ronald Hindle talks about this. So I wrestle between older and then I like to push that radical, more later 4th century BCE stuff. But again, we're dealing with text. This is another problem I have, right? Elephantine doesn't show awareness. I wish we had mentions outside of the Bible. What we have is a Balaam inscription with polytheistic deities, other gods, and it's nothing like the Bible story of Balaam. It is different, completely different. The outcome's different. There are many gods, which means Balaam may be a common mythic motif, or maybe even has a historical kernel of a Gentile or a pagan figure that they have wrote these motifs about, and the tradition still continued when they wrote their own Balaam story much later, for all I know. Dude, it's so messy. The reason why, as I say, the sections in Hosea that are there may have been added later. They may have been early. Different scholars wrestle over this. Mentions elsewhere in Isaiah that talk about Moses maybe was written post-exile, sometime in the Persian or even early Hellenistic period. We don't get a mention in Elephantine during that Persian period of any of these characters. And I don't know what the answer is, and I'm okay with it. But what I do like to do with MythVision is I like to give the strongest case for the radical view. And my scholarly buddies who are really, really prone to that older model, like the Finkelstein critical kind of consensus view that is a middle ground area, they don't like it as much. I mean, not that they don't, they fight it. They're, I don't like that, And I'm more like, nah, I want to give the case, because if not, bro, it's never going to be exposed to the public. No one's going to know about this.
Right. And the other thing that was very interesting, again, from your guys' podcast and also History Valley, is getting into, by the way, I listen to you guys when I go to the gym or driving to work, whatever it is. So
right.
It's great. I can't see the videos, but that's all right. So we had Northern Israel, Southern Israel, roughly around the 8th, 9th century. They had different religions. I mean, similar religions, different traditions, right? One was like a really focused, other one's Yahweh focused, and somehow they merged, and there was that battle between the ideological battle. It's interesting because I forget, was it a Northern school that had more polytheistic aspects and the Southern school didn't? I forget what the evidence, how that played out, but
sorry.
Didn't one of the Northern Kingdom or Southern Kingdom, didn't the Northern Kingdom have more polytheistic aspects? They had Yahweh with his wife Asherah or Anat, and then the Southern was really focused on just a particular deity.
That seems to be what the Bible implies. Under Manasseh and other figures in the north, there was clearly this Yahweh and his Asherah. There was a goddess beside him in the temple. And some of the text, this is the interesting thing about the prophets, some of the texts don't see anything negative about it. They don't condemn Asherah in some of these texts. In other texts, it's outright condemnation and that they want to get this cult out completely, which makes me kind of wonder. I like to play between, is there some historical kernel here, or is there here we are again. Did it happen? You know, these kind of questions.
Right, but this is where like the Exodus story comes into play, right? The Exodus story is like one of the first stories, aside from like Abraham, where Abraham is one God amongst many gods, and Abraham and Yahweh have built that relationship.
Mhm.
Whereas the Moses story is there's only one God.
Right.
Really, this idea that God is the God to worship as opposed to without anyone else. So maybe it's connecting. I'm just making these hypothetical connections
Right.
between the historic,
Monotheism.
the historic fight, and then engagement with the Zoroastrians in Persia that creates this monotheistic, really focused monotheism, and then create the myth around Exodus and Moses.
I like what you're thinking here, and here's why. Give us a break here if you're watching and you're my friend, okay? I like when a scholar like Gad Barnea will come up. This fits your point to make an analogy where they try to play out a historical circumstance later for why they think a narrative may have been constructed.
Right.
I've like literally interviewed John Collins, right? John Collins is like the king of the book of Daniel. He's so good of apocalypticism, Old Testament. This guy is like one of my favorite go-tos on just trying to get it, what the thoughts are about this book or that book, or how do you understand prophecy or whatever.
Sure.
And he's brilliant. And I asked John Collins in an interview, how do you think the myth of Exodus, the story of Exodus happened? Like who made it and when? And his answer was different. He said, I think when one of the kings of the north was exiled, he fled to Egypt. And when this happened historically, they constructed a narrative of an Exodus based on a historical king that was excommunicated from his kingdom, eventually coming back. But he believed the Exodus happened, I think, 7th, 8th century, based on a king that got expelled or something, right? Fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah. Well, what you just brought up is, okay, let's look at, and I want to bring up the word, the philosopher Heraclitus, because Heraclitus was influenced by the Persians, and the fire is the base element of all creation to him, right? And he was very monotheistic. He was a Greek monotheistic, pre-Socratic, brilliant philosopher. He was influenced by the Persians. Now, here's the question. Where did monotheism come up? Why is monotheism a thing? And is it possible that Persian monotheism and the Greeks being influenced by this philosophically have influenced the biblical authors to have a story that crafts Moses and Abraham creating a monotheistic-ish motif? Notice that we're taking historical circumstances later to explain a narrative that pretends it's in the 13th century BCE.
Right.
Potentially with little nuggets and fragments from the Bronze Age collapse and other elements of tradition that have somehow weaved their way down into the story later. But I don't think we need to pretend the story in the Bible must go back to this period.
It does. Yes.
Do you see the struggle of it's such a mess, but I like those. But
those are, I feel like that's all historic, all ancient texts, right?
Yeah.
They take these original stories or this incident, retell it in their own new world. Like, it's just simply put, like, we have Sherlock Holmes. He's written 150 years ago. We've had 8 iterations of Sherlock Holmes. What if we lose the original Sherlock Holmes that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, but we get the Sherlock Holmes by, let's say, Benedict Cumberbatch or by Robert Downey Jr.? That's a Sherlock Holmes.
I like that.
Now, we can see there's motifs playing back, but we have to reconstruct it because there's been so many different iterations playing forward, right? And this is like, and that's what ancient societies did, right? They take motifs and ideas that might be historical truth and kernel, and they retell it in their new world because they have new issues,
under
new
their
things they're
current
dealing with.
issues, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's the Babylon exile, Syrian conquest, the Persians conquering the Babylonians and finding a way, or even when the Greeks come in, and that's where Gad Barnea thinks that the construction of the Moses story we have. This is the most radical of all the views right now.
Right.
But I made a video about this, and I actually went through traditions, not only with Gad, but I made a documentary video that shows that much of the Bible's awareness about some of these traditions we find in authors that are in the 3rd and 2nd century BCE. So I think it's in the 3rd, maybe it's 4th or 3rd, or so. It's been a while. In it, like the Ethiopian wife, his wife is an Ethiopian. That is found externally in sources that come around this time when Hecataeus of Abdera and other figures are now constructing different traditions of Moses that are contrary, but elements of them find their way in the final production of the Bible.
Right.
So, like, Gad thinks that we need to look at Alexander, the Alexandrian library. He thinks we need to look at Greece with Alexander the Great and the conquering of them, instead of trying to go back here in the Persian period. For his reasons, there's no mention. And Judean names, or really any names in Judea, Persia, or in Elephantine, none of them name their children, name their families after any of these heroic characters that is part of sacred scripture that you would imagine would give nod to awareness. What they do have is characters named after Ahikar, Persian stories that were famous under the Persian period in its rule all the way down in Elephantine. So if there was any awareness of a Jacob, an Abraham, a Moses at all, we would hopefully find in the thousands of fragments in Elephantine with names and receipts and laws and things that are written with tons of names on them, not a single real letters, real correspondence, name of a person reflects any of the characters we find within the Bible. And that's a red flag, according to Gad Barnea and Yonatan and others, to say, if there was something, it was, which this is the standard view, a small minority of priests, or really a small minority of scribes in a corner that were fringe and not popular, already had this material somewhere. I say, why is it not just as plausible to say it wasn't written yet? There was none of that yet. And they later construct using earlier motifs, those names, those characters. Why does it have to be? No. Moses exists. I'll tell you why. I'm being rhetorical here, but I'll tell you why Moses and Jacob and Abraham have to exist. Because they already have an internal dating system in their mind using JEDP or documentary hypothesis or something else, and they see a name mentioned in Hosea 12, or they see a mention in Isaiah. We date Isaiah to this time. Well, that's when Gad comes in and goes, you do know that they, like I said, fiddled with these texts all the way down into the Common Era a lot of times. So why are we thinking they didn't have these potentially inserted later? Why do you say, when we only have the physical evidence of Isaiah, let's say 3rd, 2nd century BCE in Dead Sea Scrolls at the earliest, why are you jumping back to the 5th, 6th century, assuming these texts were written back here and that those names were already in it, when the tradition is molding and evolving and the text and the scribes are changing it as they go? We have no way to know it went back there. It is the point I think they're saying.
No, so that's very interesting. It is. I mean, but history's a mess at the end of the day. You know, it's the truth is it could, I mean, it can't be, it could be a mixture of both.
Exactly.
It could be certain trends and elements come from that period, get remolded, reworked in the Hellenic period, and then digested and brought out, you know, post CEs, right? And then even then, like you said, they still work on it. I mean, this is similar in the Indian tradition. You have all these various Puranas that take the same story, flip elements of it by each telling, and each text has a different version of it. So then how do you like reconcile these different versions? It's just, oh, our system is because we have the sense of there's infinite time, there's different ages and different universes. Oh, that's just happened another time, another universe.
Right.
So there's hermeneutics around it for people, right? It lets you say it didn't happen in our universe in our time.
Right.
But I know we got some questions that I want to take before. I'm gonna have you on again sometime because there's way more stuff to go through. But let's do some questions because I think people. Let me just start here.
Cool.
Okay. Raul says, do you know any Jewish texts mention the Kaaba as the first monotheistic worship site? Quran says Abraham built it. So it's pretty strange, right? If Jews and Christians ignored such an important place.
Yeah. If there are any Jewish texts that mention it, it would be, I would imagine, in the Common Era, potentially in regions where there might have been a Kaaba. And that's at best. And I would say likely you're going to get it maybe after Islam on the rise, because what happens, of course, every tradition starts to influence other traditions. And when Islam conquers through conquest, I can imagine the scribe of a Jewish pen, you know, potentially finding ways to collaborate or even hint at some type of common syncretism on these issues. The idea of the Kaaba is an interesting one to me. I really, really, really want to know more about this square worship structure. I just did an interview with a scholar. What's his? Bear with me.
Oh, you just had a podcast or a documentary you did, which people
I
should check out.
did. I
Yeah,
mentioned him.
Yeah.
I mentioned the scholar in it. It is Dr. Ilka Lindstedt, and he talks about epigraphic evidence in pre-Islamic Arabia, and shows he practically shows that all of the inscriptions are monotheistic after the 3rd century of the Common Era in Arabia. That there is no 365 gods in a Kaaba. Like he said, and I'm with him on this. I think that what you do when you write and craft a new mythic kind of tradition is you want to demonize the other so that it really makes yours stand out. Look at the Christian tradition of the sleepers of Ephesus, which you find the hints of the sleepers in the cave in Islam. That tradition, by the way, is not original to Christians. They also are inspired by the earlier Zeus story. There's a cave of Zeus where a man goes and sleeps in the cave. I can't remember how many years. It's 40 something, or it's a long time. The Christians go to sleep in the cave. The world is pagan. When they wake up, the world is Christian. The Muslim goes to sleep in the cave. The world is pagan. They wake up. The world is monotheistic. It's Islam. Well, I don't think it's the identical motif in the older Greek myth, the story of the sleeper. But my point is this. What is up with the Kaaba? As a historical question, I really want to know, because it's a rock and it's in a sacred square sanctuary. And I kind of wonder if there's some connection to Persian Mithras, Persian Roman Mithras, and Dusaris that Epiphanius talks about in the 4th century, about Petra and some of these particular locations where, for those who don't know, Mithras was born from a rock. Kumarbi, I think, in the Hittite myth, there's something to do with a rock, birth from a rock. And I think there's a lot of borrowing from that framework, that cultural framework. But dude, they were already monotheistic for centuries before Muhammad came on the scene. The narrative is, the dark pagan world, we reformed it. That's a myth. That's really a myth. And even in the Christian story, it's a myth, because, a myth as in that's not factually historically the case, because even in the Christian one, the Roman world, while there was lots of paganism, polytheism, if you want to just adopt the synonymous term there in this view, there were many, many Romans going down the philosophical monotheistic route. There were many non-Christian monotheists. And to pretend that it was just all darkness and nobody had, dude, you guys, if it weren't for you touching your torch to the Stoics, to the Middle Platonists, to the Cynics, if you weren't touched by their philosophies, your torch would not be burning brighter as it is. So you're pretending. There's an ignorance on people who are reading back as if the world was dark before we came along. No, it was burning brighter than you realize. And once you realize that, you could see the storytelling. It's a story. It's a foundation myth. That's all it is. And it helps you combat people who pretend that one ideology is the only thing that brought us good in the world, like the apologists do, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't know a lot about the Kaaba too much, man. I want to know more.
Well, I mean, I think you're exploring that because you've had a few people on the podcast where you talked about Islam, and you talked about the Arabic period before Islam. I forget who the scholar was. There's another scholar you had on.
Shadi Nasser.
Shadi Nasser. Yeah. It was great stuff. I mean, and I think this new one that you just released 2 or 3 days ago on this polytheism versus monotheism in the Arabian Peninsula before Islam is something people should take a watch and check out.
Thank you.
And so I don't know much about the Kaaba either, so I don't have anything to add. All right, the next one here is, so can we say indirectly to the Persian Indian motifs have an influence? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think so, bro. I look, people are, the growing scholarly trends tend to go Jewish only for Christianity. Let's just take Christianity and Judaism, for example. Jewish only. Okay, we'll allow Mesopotamian because it's so obvious in Genesis that the Enuma Elish seems to be the backdrop somewhere, whether indirectly or directly. We're cool with Mesopotamia. well, if you're cool with Mesopotamia, like Persia is literally
right there.
Mesopotamia. I mean, like, so like, yeah. So I totally agree with you. I think you would agree with me that there's there's got to be influence, but I'm actually flirting with this idea, and I'm going to have a video come out at some point where I'm going to go again, push the boundaries, and show parallels between Buddha and Jesus. And there is a story where Buddha is, I'm not making this up. I don't know the source. I'm butchering the story telling it, but he's on a river. He walks on the water of a river. He's literally elevated like Jesus is said to have walked on water. He's on a river. In the middle of the river, a disciple begins to walk out to him on the river and then starts to doubt, just like Peter doubts Jesus in the gospel. And then he begins to sink into the water, just like Peter sinks into the water when he doubts Jesus. And that doesn't prove there's a genetic direct, but like, if you don't know that, I think it's worth knowing. You know what I mean? Like, this needs to be shown. How many people know that? And you know, that's this kind of stuff I want to do.
So there's a later tradition also in the Hindu world that takes on this Buddhist tradition and reworks it, by the way.
Really?
In the 7th century, there's a philosopher named Shankara who 7th century CE, not BC. So it's like 1,000 plus years after Buddha. So he is walking on water and walking to the other side. His disciple is on the other side of the river, and he runs across the river. And as he runs, he walks on water, but where he steps, it becomes lotuses. So there's like lotuses come up, and he walks on. And so it's similar in that sense. It's these motifs again. You look at this stuff, you're like, well, I mean, first of all, walking on water is like, I would imagine for ancient peoples or even non-modern peoples, even modern people, if you saw someone walking on water, you'd be like, that's fucking magical, right? You know, like,
yeah.
Unless you find out, oh, it's actually shallow. They put this little see-through glass, you can walk through it, whatever. But so I don't think the motifs, the idea is that far-fetched that can't be universal, but it is a particular sense always connected to a teacher and a disciple. That's where the motif actually has power.
I think, and I don't know exactly. I was reading a scholar pertaining to Zarathustra and Zoroaster, and Zoroaster comes to a body of water at 30 years of age, just like Jesus is 30 years of age at this time when he's, on his mission. And he has a divine revelation at a body of water at 30 years of age, where he then sees the dualistic issues of heaven and he's called on his mission. The same way you might say Jesus at the baptism has this life-transforming PGM, if you will, magical papyri kind of thing going on that I also kind of see over here with the Persian story. But you don't even need to say there's a genetic, even though I like to flirt with these ideas if they're there. But even before you go to the idea of the lotus flower and Buddha and stuff, you can even say Hermes hovers over, flies across, and in Genesis 1, I mean, God's spirit is literally on the water. So there's a blending, I think. It's like hovering above the water, and it's over the chaotic primordial before
the causal waters. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm thinking to myself, here's waters Jesus is walking on. Is this hinting at him being Yahwistic in like some way or something? Maybe. But like you kind of, it's not a 1-for-1, and you don't have to go, Mark only looked at Hebrew Bible. Mark only had, like, bro, really? Why do we have to just isolate these thinkers when they're in a broadened world where they're definitely being educated and learning things? It's just an old idea that I think is kind of dated, is like, we have to only look for Jewish antecedents for everything that we're trying to find. And unless we're forced to have to deal with Roman stuff or Greek stuff or Persian stuff, I don't think you need to be forced. The Levant is literally right there. You know what I mean? So,
well, it's not only that. I mean, if you're living in a milieu where all these different stories, these ideas, these things are percolating through, you don't think this it will fall. Either you're going to respond to this tradition, the world outside you, with like coming back with facts, whatever debate, or you're going to internalize it and say, look, we're no different than you. Right?
Exactly.
there's no place that's just siloed off unless you're an island, like sitting out
Yeah.
nowhere and no one interacts with you. You know, like
That would be a
which
great. Imagine if we found.
we have one.
Well, I'm saying like clearly I'm saying like imagine we had a story that
Yeah.
we knew we could date to 10,000 BCE. Just pretend we
Right.
had an oral story dated to 10,000 BCE, and then we found an indigenous tribe that told a story, not the same, but we were able to map and see how this isolated group believed a certain thing,
Yeah.
and how from the documented 10,000 BCE source to today documented the evolution of the story compared to what happened on the isolated island. Or it'd be great if we knew that humans evolved without ever contact with any other group and we saw the stories they had, because then we would know they didn't. If we could know that they didn't have contact, I would love to just be able to rule out this whole Carl Jung, the
archetypes.
the archetypes thing, because how much of this is universal and how much of this is trade, contact, blending with the other stories. I'd love to calculate that. I'd love to go, I actually think this is from an old story that they passed along, or just the simple human.
Well, the archetypal stuff is interesting because you do have something like this, right? Like you had all the old world and the new world. So all the people in the Americas, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, in the North Americas, all these people,
True.
They had no contact with the Europeans, the Indians, the Chinese for at least 11,000, 12,000 years.
Right.
So they developed, unless there was a tradition, you're fair, 20,000 years ago that was shared and it comes through. But it could be, maybe it's, I don't know.
But the other problem is when the Europeans came, they also then started converting and the stories changed, and we didn't get. I wish someone came over and wrote down exactly what they believed at that time without being tainted by the European Catholic Church. You know what I mean? Sorry to interrupt.
That's interesting. No, it's a good point, because I actually don't know enough to see. Do we have do we have some evidence written? I know they had a written language. I don't know if we have any documents or any sort of.
That's a good
question. I don't know.
I don't know.
I would love to explain. Yeah. I don't know enough about it, so I don't have any.
I need to talk to a scholar, don't I?
yeah, that's right. That's a good place to go. What's also interesting is, after Alexander's invasion into all the region in India, and then it comes up to India, goes back, all those areas get Hellenized, right? Mm-hmm. So India has a deep Hellenistic influence at that time. Afghanistan, which creates its whole new culture called, I think, the Gandharan culture, which you see imagery take shape to be more like Greeks. Mm-hmm. So I also postulate at some level, this is just my hypothesis, that I think the modern Indian temple like idols, and the way they've artistically look, come from the Greco-Romans. And I think it's been merged with the Indian one, and then they created this new system. Because it's just a theory I have. Like, for example, I don't know if I don't want to go look for it now, but you'll find that you saw the Buddha statues, the Taliban blew up in like 2000 or 1990s, right?
I don't remember what it looked like, but I know. Yeah,
they blew up the bombing Buddhas, and if you looked at the statue, it looks very Greco-Roman, right?
Yeah,
it's so you'll find those influences playing through. So just to say that it's not a one way; it's a two-way conversation that's going on between these cultures and traditions or across. Some decades ask, let's see here. Isn't there a statue of Buddha with her as Hercules, or Hercules as Buddha? I believe there is. There is, I think, a statue found in the Afghan region that had Hercules as a Buddha.
Interesting. It makes sense. He was called Savior of the World in many of the sources by cynics and stuff. So they're traveling and they're getting a lot of their philosophical back and forth, the conversation, like you said,
Yeah. I actually think even maybe Vajrapani later is connected to that. I don't know. There's traditions around this. It is interesting when you see this merger occur. This is right. So this is the one. Let me this up, and I think share screen here. This is this one right here. Look at this. I think this is where you see Hercules with a club, holding the club here. That's supposed to be Heracles, I believe. That's
I don't
Buddha.
see it. Just so you know.
Oh, it's not. It's not up. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Oh, I gotta share it. That's my fault. So okay. So if you look at that this person here is holding a club.
Yep.
That's supposed to be Heracles.
Yeah.
And that's Buddha, right? Because everyone else is clothed, he isn't. This is normally how Greeks, it's pretty cool stuff when you see the interactions between the various traditions and how their syncretic nature is.
Yeah. I mean, look at the Christian church. They have a tradition where Buddha, Asclepius, these deities convert to Jesus. They literally they convert these gods from the pagan world, or the I hate using the term, but you know what that means. Yeah. So like it makes sense. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah. So no, I'm gonna let you go because we've almost hit like 2.5 hours. But I just did on this weekend. I did a response video to Wes Huff.
Yes.
Did you see the podcast where he went on Flagrant?
I didn't even watch it, bro. It's hard to stomach him repeating some of the stuff he said. Like it's like so like, how many times do I have to constantly correct these guys? I wish if one of these other shows would invite me, great. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I keep doing it, and it's just.
But I was going to say, like, isn't it frustrating when you have apologists with the garb of a scholar? They use that as like their cloak and their shield and their weapon. For their apologetics is, at the end of the day, it's like, where does your apologetics start and where does it end?
Exactly.
And I don't know. And do you have a sense?
Primarily, it's apologetics. I think that's a primary thing.
Yeah, because even like you said, Ellen Pagels is a believer, but you don't get that sense in her books. You get just scholarly information, right? Like really approaching it in that way. And I think there's a good amount of scholars that you have, even John McCrossan, right, who's a believer. He's but his scholarship is phenomenal. Dale Allison, another great, so what I'm saying is there's these guys, and then there's someone like Wes Huff that comes into the space and just talks from a place of authority around some stuff. And he talks like, oh, I'm an expert on world religions. I'm like, no, you're wrong in what you're talking about world religions, because you're making these false equivalencies. Not all, one of the comments is like, all religions are inherently exclusive. I'm like, that's not true.
Yeah.
They might be exclusive as to one aspect, like the only way to salvation is through this way, but you can have spiritual gains. You can go up in the world. There's Buddhism is open to that. Hinduism is open to that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is extremely frustrating dealing with this guy. Really more so not him. Yeah, he's annoying. He's cringe, right? But it's more so watching the society of commoners just slavishly worship what he says and blindly accept what this guy says because, well, if he says it just polite enough and if he communicates in such a fashion with confidence enough, they will be persuaded by his particular argumentation. Like, dude, get real. So I called the bluff from the beginning with Neil from Gnostic Informant for the viewer. And it's just, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll hit him again at some point with another hit piece if he does something stupid. But I'm also like letting other people, get into, because people go, oh, you keep doing this about, are you jealous? Like, no, clearly not. But I also don't clearly, I don't know. I don't have the time to waste on this. I feel like I do better when I'm doing my videos where I just straightforward bring academic work and research and stuff. And this gets messy and very drama, and we do get sucked into it. And I'm like, how much do I want to bring the drama? I can bring it here and there, but
Yeah,
give
but
a break.
I think you had like Kip Davis and Joshua Bowen on, or you guys did like a dissection of West Huff, right?
Yeah,
a while
yeah.
back. And that's important too, because it's like you have two scholars that know what they're talking about, and the traditions, and you're coming to the table and addressing the misinformation and issues around that. That I think is important too, right? Because he's been on two of the largest podcasts in the world, and
Right.
says what he says, and it has to be addressed. I mean, it's not like Rogan's going to have on Joshua Bowen or Kip Davis,
I would
to
love it,
address it.
but
It would be great, or to have
yeah.
on like any of these other people that are really, really great scholars. But that's
I
just
mean,
not gonna be the case.
imagine what would happen if he did allow one of the experts to come in, right?
Yeah,
It's almost like, because they're so scholarly in the way that they approach the material as
right,
experts, I don't know if Joe would be impressed. And the reason why is that
right,
they're not selling a story. They're not pitching a social, cultural, nationalistic Christian
right,
perspective. Like they're coming in going, okay, so first of all, if you look at papyri Q1246, and like instead, what he did is he did a great exaggeration of a narrative of like word for word, word for word,
right.
word for word. Let me tell you, thousands of years, God has preserved his word. Like, it's like, yo, what? Hold on.
Yeah,
So Joe likes that, if you will. He's more
right.
sympathetic to that than he probably would a real bona fide expert in a field on these matters, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah. I think most experts would be like, well, the evidence says to lean this way, but there's and when you have these podcasts, sometimes you want that bombastic claim, right? Oh, boom, it hits
Yeah,
you with, because it also brings viewers and stuff. But
of course.
okay, I don't think there's any more questions. What do you got? What do you have going on next, Derek? Going on in the next few weeks in terms of what are you producing out there? What can people look forward to?
Yeah. So I have a couple of videos cooking. My editing team is working on. We have one that is actually going to be talking about this recent cult leader, Mandi something. He claims to be the new pope. He's the Jesus reincarnate. He is the final, before the very end of the apocalypse of Muhammad. He claims like all of this about himself, and he has members online who claim he's done miracles. That video is coming. I've got one on Adam and Eve, another one coming. I've got another one that is talking about the Pope, the recent Pope, some of the pros, we hope, but also some of the scandals that go back to priest fiddling, boys,
Yeah,
and how he was part of relocating one within walking distance of a kid's school. And like there's some stuff people don't know about the new Pope that caused a lot of people who know about it trouble about him being
right.
elected. Yeah, sure, he's US Pope, but like, come on. And then I have another one on Asherah, the secret wife of God, coming.
Oh, that'll
And
be
then
good.
I have the Dark Exodus, looking at it from a dark perspective of like the immoral and the bad. I've got a whole bunch of videos coming. I'm trying to do more live streams. And what else? Oh, we actually have a course with Elaine Pagels that is going to hopefully drop soon. She gets into some pretty cool stuff in this course that makes us think Gospel Thomas and the Gospel of Mary might be pretty early. I mean, Thomas
Wow.
has to be, in her view, earlier than John, or the
Right.
final version of John. But Mary might be earlier than Luke, the Gospel of Mary.
Wow.
In the Gospel of Mary, I'll tease you with this. These are like really key points. Mary says there are 7 powers of heaven, and she's describing them, what they are, and she's the chief disciple over against Peter, who's not happy. In Luke, Mary has cast 7 demons out. So the question is someone writing a Gospel of Mary after a demonic expulsion of 7 demons? Or is
Yeah.
it more likely that this gospel, which has Mary with 7 powers of heaven, that Luke, its version, is actually trying to attack Mary
Right.
as a figurehead, making her demon possessed by 7 demons? You see? So
Yeah.
there is some dialogue going on between the Gospel of Mary and the Luke's gospel with this issue, I think. And she thinks so too. And there's other reasons why. And she covers this in the course. And then other things too that get more into her spiritual perspectives and things. It's
Right.
it's gonna be good. Yeah. So
Yeah, I was gonna actually say I would love for you to do some more on the Gnostic stuff because I think that'd be great.
I've got stuff coming on that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. The Gnostics and on your point about the Exodus, the one you're going to do, the Dark Exodus. It's one of the points I brought up to on the response to Wes was I said basically, look, your guys you're saying that God wanted the Canaanites, the Amorites, all these people killed because they were doing child sacrifices and killing all these, doing these evil, horrific stuff. Right. What do you think Passover was? The sacrifice to Yahweh. You sacrifice other people's kids. It's just another sacrifice.
Yep. It's dark.
Yeah, but that's the point. Is like your God's doing no different. So you can't make the moral argument there. Right? That's all I'm saying. But anyways, awesome to have you, Derek, dude. It's been a blast. Really, I think the listeners had a great time. And I had a fantastic time. The time flew by. I could still go for another 3-4 hours, but I know you got stuff to do. And I do too. But let's do something soon. And thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're going to be on my show next. I want to dive into the East and really get your thoughts about some cool stuff. Comparative mythology is like my thing. And if you can tickle my ear, man, I'm all ears. You know what I mean?
I definitely 100%. And everybody, please, again, follow, like, and subscribe to MythVision, both on Twitter and on YouTube. And support him if you can with Patreon. It's awesome. Thanks, and everyone, have a wonderful day. Take care. And
यमुना तीरे गायती वनमाली गायती वनमाली मधुरम गायती वनमाली